Good evening, Janine. Can you hear me?
Hi, Mark.
Hi there. Great.
We do have all Board of Appeal members now.
All right, and I see Attorney Roloffs, and I think I saw Attorney Vaughn. All right, I see. All right, so let's get, I see Attorney as well, so we'll get started. All right, welcome to tonight's Town of Winchester Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for May 13th, 2021. Tonight's meeting is a continuation of petition 3935, excuse me, that of 2 Abbey Road. I'm gonna, on the board with me tonight are Robert Tedesco as a full-time member and Dorothy Simboli as an alternative member. We will be, as this is a continuation, we'll be just hearing from, we'll be having a full meeting. I think we sent away Attorney Roloffs and Attorney Vaughn with some questions that we were looking to have answered, specifically related around the calculation of the height of the structure at 2 Abbey Road. We will, to the extent that there is new or additional information that folks are looking to present, we would be interested in hearing that. We would ask that if the material is already covered, that we try to stay on topic and, out of respect for the board's time and everyone's time, that we, stick to new materials that have not been previously covered in previous meetings, or feel are, have not been fully addressed. So, Attorney Roloffs, I will let you go first. So
when you go into and we do the,
excuse me, who's speaking? Sorry,
what is that apple there?
Janine, can you mute?
No,
It's
that's-
Apple Events.
All right, great. All right, so tonight I will start this meeting at 7:03 p.m. Attorney Roloffs, we will have you present first, followed up by Attorney Vaughn.
Great, thank you. Good evening. Jeff Roloffs for the petitioner. I did submit a couple days ago an updated outline of the grounds for the petitioner's grounds for appeal. The first page of that document, I don't know if you've had a chance to review it yet, is basically the same outline of the grounds that I submitted before the last meeting. But then I went into each of those grounds, identified the relevant materials and bullet pointed some of the key points. And I'm not going to walk through this tonight. We covered most of it at the last meeting. I have reviewed Attorney Vaughn's letter of May 11th and materials. So I just want to highlight a few of the points, partly responsive to that letter and also just to supplement the conversation that we had previously. Let's start with the building height. Art, you had requested a particular calculation with respect to the building height in feet. And in my document, I actually addressed that on page 2 with the calculation itself in footnote 1. And what you had asked us to do, as I understand it, was to measure the building height from the grades that we were measuring from, but to do it at the 6 building points, corner points, that the developer was measuring or using for their calculations. So basically, we added the 2 minor points, as we characterize them, We went from the grades that were on the developer's proposed site plan, which, as I understand it, are the grades that were established after Abbey Road was built and before he started building the home there. And the calculation, as seen in footnote 1, brings you just above the 40-foot height limit. So there's still a height problem if you were to measure it that way. Again, with the developers, I see it is still measuring height from the finished grades, the approved finished grades as shown on the subdivision plan, rather than the existing grades, and they're using 6 points. So we disagree with that approach. With that, I'll leave it and move on to the site plan review topic, which I address on page 4 of my outline. So the site, we did discuss this at the last meeting, and I just wanted to emphasize a few points there. Site plan review is completely different than subdivision review. Attorney Vaughn in his letter plays out a scenario where somebody might have grades reviewed in a subdivision process and then go to site plan review and have everything denied because they see things differently. My first response to that is site plan review generally doesn't lead to denials, especially for an as of right use. Generally speaking, site plan review is intended to be a process for regulating projects, certain projects that the town believes are significant enough to warrant further review. It's a zoning board of appeals process, not a planning board process. And the criteria are much broader. The focus is much different than in the subdivision review process. There's nothing in the zoning bylaw that exempts projects that involve significant grade changes from site plan review if they're also being reviewed by the planning board in a subdivision process. And so it's a completely different process. I'll just remind the board, a lot of projects that require site plan review or trigger site plan review do need multiple permits. That's not unusual. Like I said, very often developers will go in and apply for these permits simultaneously. Sometimes they'll string one ahead of another one because for whatever reason, it varies town to town, but it's not unusual to have to apply for multiple approvals, even where there's overlapping jurisdiction on the topics of review. So in our position on this is that the grade changes that are being made to the grades that were established, even if you only look at the grades that were established after Abbey Road was built, the grade changes after that are still significant enough to trigger the site plan review requirement. Going before that, even for the subdivision road itself, that should have itself undergone site plan review because that was obviously a development activity that resulted in very significant grade changes. And again, there's nothing in the zoning bylaw that would exempt subdivision projects from the site plan review process. So in my view, the developer should have applied to the ZBA and the planning board simultaneously and addressed all of these issues together. But they didn't do that. They haven't done it. Site plan review was triggered. It wasn't ever done, and it needs to be done. Let me turn now to the violations of the subdivision approval. That starts on page 5 of my outline. The first point I want to make there in response to Attorney Vaughn's letter is with respect to the mature trees that were supposed to be protected. So Attorney Vaughn attaches to his letter a copy of the landscaping plan, which was one of the plans within the subdivision plans that were approved. He notes that there were no trees identified on that plan sheet as having to be protected. And I agree with him on that. But the subdivision plan, if you look to the sedimentation and erosion control plan, sheet C1, I won't spend the time to get you there, but you have those plans in front of you. But if you go to sheet C1, we reviewed it at the last meeting, there are mature trees very clearly identified on the plan, and they're labeled for protection. So there's no doubt that there were, and I think there were at least 3 of those trees are on lot 1. And then there were a couple others on lot 3. I'll also just note with respect to the tree issue that I did go back to the planning board hearing videos, and the current developer was participating in the hearing in front of the planning board as an abutter at that time, and was actively in the discussions related to protecting trees. And as I interpreted his comments at that time, he was suggesting to the board that they shouldn't seek to protect too many of the trees because some of the trees were dying and warranted removal. But again, he was fully aware that that the planning board wanted these trees protected, and yet he went in there and cleared them. And to date, no one has remedied that problem. One of the other issues I note in my outline is that now with the current proposal and the reduced rear yard area, the patios, the deck, and the infiltration areas that are proposed, it prevents him from being able to put in the type of replacement trees that are warranted as replacement trees. So the proposed plan really precludes a meaningful remedy. And let me just close on with respect to the subdivision on this question of why the footprints were shown on the subdivision plan. I mean, there are a lot of different theories on that. Now, what we've heard from the developer and council is that they were only shown there to assist in the stormwater analysis that was being done in connection with the subdivision process. And it's true that, and I went back to review the peer review response letters that were done there, and the grading in the house lots were part of the stormwater review. They fed into the calculations. And in my mind, that just makes it more important and supports our view that these house lots and the grading that was associated with them, as shown on the approved subdivision plans, are binding. Now, again, there's flexibility that the planning board gave the developer specifically through condition 9 of its approval. But other than that flexibility, there is none. The other, Attorney Vaughn lists a number of reasons why it's sort of absurd to treat these footprints or these house lot locations and the other details related to the house as binding details. I've already shared with you the case law on that issue. Even if the board exceeded its authority to regulate house grading and landscaping details and things like that, once it was accepted by the applicant, they're binding details of the subdivision approval. But with respect to the building footprints, the question I want to raise is this: why would the applicant at that time, if all you're doing is putting a box on a plan so that you can feed the impervious area into a stormwater analysis, why would you put footprints on the plan that require variances, that don't comply with the zoning, and then therefore do require the variances, and also are so small? I mean, if the purpose of putting them there was to make sure that the stormwater design was going to be appropriate to accommodate a compliant bylaw, a compliant build out, and the applicant's leaving the flexibility to build the largest and the greatest amount of impervious area that the zoning bylaw would allow, shouldn't the planning board require the applicant to come in with a building footprint and associated grading of a house that errs on being on the larger side and doesn't require variances? It doesn't make sense. The reason they were put here was because the applicant at that time was trying to sell this project to the neighbors and to the town. The development agreement hadn't been signed yet. And so there was a reason. There were representations made that they were coming in with a good project with homes that were comparable to other smaller homes in the neighborhood, that they were coming in with a project that would require variances, and as they said in their narrative, that they were hoping the planning board would support to allow them to push the houses closer to Abbey Road so that they could maintain a larger rear yard space. That was the reason they were shown there, and everything tied into the buildings on the plans, the grading on the subdivision plans that are directly linked to those buildings. And, you know, in my view, when the applicant went in for a variance, number one, I think they presented a plan that deviated pretty significantly than as compared to what was shown on the subdivision plan. But also, once the variance was denied for lot one, at that point, the concept fell apart. This development concept fell apart. They should have been required to go back to the planning board with a new plan with new house lots and grading lines for a modification of the subdivision approval to ensure that the stormwater system actually is appropriately designed to accommodate this sort of build out. They didn't review it with a conceptual maximum build out scenario. So in our view, those details are binding with the exception of the flexibility the board gave them through condition 9. And the project either needs to be changed or they need to go back to the planning board and get a modification of the subdivision approval, which would also be a good time for them to review the stormwater impacts associated with the revised design. So again, there are a number of other points in my outline, but given that there are other people who want to speak tonight and we've hit most of these issues previously, I'm going to end it there unless you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Roloff. Any questions, Robert, Dorothy? No. Attorney Vaughn, I'll turn it over to you. You're on mute, Attorney Vaughn. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Good
No
evening.
worries.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. So for the record, Attorney Mark Vaughn, I'm here tonight representing the owner of Lot 1. The subject of the appeal here with me is Steve Meinelt. Also, we have our architect with us as well, Lee Hartley. So I was going to see if screen sharing could possibly be accommodated here for Steve Meinelt to just pull up my letter that I did submit a couple of days ago as well that Mr. Roloff was making reference to. There's some items in there that I'd like to cover with the board, and also, you know, in response to some of the information that came in, you know, late in the day, I guess the date of the last hearing, which would have been April 15th. But so, you know, I'm going to try not to be repetitive in terms of the points that we have made before, but I do want to just kind of hit the high notes on this that in our opinion, clearly there is no justification to overturning the building permit for Lot 1. The building permit was correctly issued for that building as it's being proposed for Lot 1. So with respect to the development agreement, we acknowledge that there was a provision in there that required us to apply for a front yard setback variance of no less than 5 feet. That was sought, as the board knows. There's nothing in the development agreement that has any requirements pertaining to house location, house size, or required rear yard setback. It was simply that provision in there about us applying for a variance, which, as the board knows, we did. And that was not granted by the ZBA because you determined that we did not satisfy the required criteria for the issuance of a variance. And I don't think that there was one board commenting on that, including the planning board, that recommended that the variance be granted. So, you know, we have complied with the terms of the development agreement, and that variance was not issued. So, Steve, if you could just scroll down to the, on the subdivision itself. So we disagree strongly with Attorney Roloff in terms of his assessment that the depiction of the sample house footprints on the subdivision plan have any basis in terms of being binding relative to location, size, setback, or whatever it might be. The fact of the matter is that the subdivision control law can't dictate those elements. You know, I've cited some cases, I've cited some statutes in here. I'm going to just quickly run through it, but it's the intent of the subdivision control law that any definitive subdivision plan that's filed with the planning board shall be approved if it conforms to the recommendation of the Board of Health and to the reasonable rules and regulations of the planning board. That's chapter 41, section 81M. And then I quoted a case in here, Board of Selectmen of Air versus Planning Board of Air, that unlike a grant of a variance from a zoning bylaw, to which no one has a legal right, one is entitled to have a definitive subdivision plan approved unless it's shown to be in conflict with recommendations of the Board of Health or the reasonable rules and regulations of the planning board. And then if you read chapter 4181Q, which I've quoted in the next paragraph, it specifically says that except insofar as it may require compliance with the requirements of existing zoning ordinances or bylaws, no rule or regulation shall relate to the size, shape, width, frontage, or use of lots within a subdivision or to the buildings which may be constructed thereon. So a planning board may not impose requirements in excess of those contained in the zoning bylaws. So I understand that there was environmental impact statement that was provided, wherein there were statements in there, but nothing, while the board can seek information as part of that, that same statute prohibits the planning board from regulating the size, shape, width, frontage, or use of lots within a subdivision. And, I've cited cases for that, including one that indicates that it's been held to preclude a planning board from imposing frontage requirements independent of and more stringent than those of the zoning bylaw. So with respect to Abbey Road and Lot 1, so any reference to that would not be enforceable, okay? I understand that in the environmental impact report, there may have been statements about how homes might be sized and sited, which has no binding effect, as I stated before, based on the statute. Particularly, by the way, where the siting of those homes doesn't comply with zoning. It doesn't satisfy, it violates the front yard setback requirement.
Placed.
I've highlighted some text here as well that was from that narrative that I just wanted to read to the board. I think it embodies why this is non-binding in terms of anything that says there. It says that the proposed new homes will have siding, massing, material, and other features allowed or defined by the Town of Winchester zoning bylaw or state building code. The outlines of potential homes are for discussion purposes only, and the eventual footprint size would be in conformance with the Town of Winchester's standards regarding size of structure. Regarding massing, the intent of the footprint shown in our definitive subdivision submission is to illustrate how a sample home footprint might be cited on the proposed lot. Final home sizes will be determined by the project upon future application for building permits. So, look, Town Planner Brian Zakelli, he's acknowledged that these references have no binding impact, cannot be made or considered a condition of the subdivision approval. As I mentioned before, the Lot 1 owner did submit an application for a front yard setback variance as required by the development agreement. The planning board recommended unfavorably, unanimously to the Board of Appeals on that variance application, indicating that it doesn't meet the standards for a variance. They also recommended unfavorably, by the way, on Lot 2, but as you know, that lot was treated differently by the ZBA because we found justification in terms of lot shape, size, topography, or whatever that justified in that instance. So not even the planning board then, which deliberated on and approved the subdivision, interpreted these sample home footprints to have any binding effect. And as I mentioned in my letter, it would certainly be an odd circumstance, and I say a ridiculous scenario, where we're led to believe, as Attorney Roloff suggests, that a planning board considers something as a condition, yet the same planning board actually advocates to another board, that being you, the ZBA, against satisfying that very same condition. So, in the next paragraph, I've just, cited reasons why there's tremendous inconsistencies that are on the plan in terms of any relevance or reliance upon those sample home footprints having, a compelling, valid application. As I mentioned at the prior hearing, there's at least one instance, that being Lot 2, where the sample home footprint wouldn't even fit within the allowable building envelope shown in the plan. So we're led to believe that we have to, build this home footprint, yet it doesn't even fit within the required building envelope. And we've also talked about the inconsistencies and, contradictions that are in there in terms of setbacks and what's required, what's shown. On lot 1, you have a reference to a 47.9 foot rear yard setback, yet the table actually shows it would be 20 feet. And then, not to mention that the location of the sample home footprint on lot 1 would have required a 12-foot front yard setback variance, not the 5-foot that was referenced in the development agreement. So let's talk about site plan review, if we could, if you could go to that section of the letter, Steve. So site plan, the attorney roll-offs is attempting to argue that even though the subject property has gone through extensive review by the planning board, the town engineer, and the town's independent peer review consultant, which is VHB, nationally known firm that was hired by the planning board to do an independent peer review evaluation of this project. So notwithstanding that, where all matters pertaining to grading, drainage, and infiltration were reviewed, that somehow there's still a requirement to go through a site plan review for each lot, and I'm hearing tonight, evidently for the roadway itself. So our position is clear, as we've said before, that unless the owner of lot 1 is changing the slope over 6% from the approved subdivision grades that have already been reviewed and allowed pursuant to that review by more than for an area more than 500 square feet, which we are not, then site plan approval is not required. So to that end, my client was specifically instructed by the town engineer to not change the grading pattern from lot 1 from what was approved by the planning board, as the drainage systems for the house lots and the subdivision road were all integrated as part of that approved design. So Steve, I'd actually like you to pull up that document if you could, because I think it might be helpful for the board to see, but so this is a email communication between, my client and the town engineer, Beth Rudolph, at the time, where question was raised and answered by Beth Rudolph. But if you could see on lot 2 there, let me just pull it up on my screen as well, so I can, bear with me one moment. So the question that was posed by my clients to Beth Rudolph, the town engineer, was as follows. Grading elevations that were proposed for the houses are not set in stone, correct? I know the road elevations were set in stone, but just wanted to check on the lots as it relates to grading. And her answer, which is in blue text, is the grading on lot 1 should not change. There is a swale designed on the street side of the property to convey water towards Highland Avenue should Sawmill Brook overflow. See grading below, and that's that depiction there. You will need to provide an as-built plan of the lot post-construction to demonstrate that the swale has been appropriately constructed, as it was an integral part of the drainage calculations and design. So my client was instructed by the town engineer to not waver at all from the grading as it was shown on lot 1. That's what they were required to build out and provide. So you could go back to the letter there if you could, Steve, but thanks. And so again, our opinion is that any other interpretation would be illogical, inconsistent with land use practice. And I know Attorney Roloff's indicated that, this might be the case elsewhere. It's not something that I'm familiar with, where a subdivision needs to go through a site plan approval process as well, because, if you think about what the ramifications of it would be, the subdivision road gets approved by the planning board. And then you have to come in for site plan approval because of the grade change of the road. and there's a determination made that, by another board that they don't like the layout of the road, or, it's too many trees that are being removed for the subdivision road, it doesn't make sense. And I would also note that pursuant to the planning board's rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land, all the butters were notified of the planning board hearings for Abbey Road, for where matters pertaining to grading and drainage were all discussed and reviewed in detail. So where these grades ultimately were, what the slope of the road, the grading on each lot was going to be constructed, that was all shown in great detail and discussed part of the subdivision review process. So, and just lastly on this topic of site plan review, I again, want to call your attention to the email from town planner Brian Zakelli that was submitted to the ZBA. If you could just bring that up again, I would appreciate it, Steve. But this is the December 2nd, 2020 email. So this was sent to Janine back in December when this question first arose relative to the applicability of site plan review and whether it's required or what. But I think you can see in detail there that the grading plan and the wall in question was approved through the subdivision process. And Steve, can you just zoom in on that a little bit if you could, please? So, yeah, great. That's good right there. Yeah. The grading plan of the wall in question was approved through the subdivision process in order to create the road and set up the lots. Craig was supposed to build the wall and do the grading, but the current developer bought into that work and is completing the work that was already approved by the town. It is not necessary, in my opinion, for the current variance applicant, Steve Meinelt, to also go through a site plan review process for grading and wall construction that was already approved through the subdivision process. So, I just wanted to remind the board of that, which came directly from the planning director, who was intricately involved with this subdivision process. So, and then just back to the letter, Steve, by letter, if you could, on the landscaping plan. So I understand that the approved landscaping plan that was shown on the subdivision, sheet C5 of the subdivision plan, that is the approved landscaping plan. It shows trees to be planted on lot 1, as well as a reference to a tree between lot 1 and Highland Avenue, which is to remain. There is no reference on the approved landscaping plan to other trees to remain on lot 1. We intend to comply with that approved landscaping plan. I know there's been statements made about how that's not possible with the design of the infiltration. We disagree. One of the trees may need to shift over a couple of feet, but the intent is that we are going to be satisfying the approved landscaping plan as shown on the approved subdivision plan. So these items are not relevant to the building permit for the house. If there's a feeling that, something needs to be enforced from the planning board in terms of the subdivision plan, then, there's a remedy there. But as it relates, and I am familiar with the sediment and erosion plan that Attorney Roloffs has referenced as well. And there are, I think, 2 trees that were shown on there. And by the way, that was for the construction of the road and the grading associated with the road and the creation of the lots. So I think it's arguable as to whether the tree references on that plan are required when we're looking to, because for the approved landscaping plan, it actually shows where the retaining wall required to be constructed would exist, which wouldn't allow those 3 trees that Mr. Roloffs refers to even be able to stay. But anyway, with respect to those trees, 2 of them says to remain only if possible. And one of them is actually in the rear of the lot, which would be in the exact location where the retaining wall is. So it's clear that the approved landscaping plan would control in this instance in terms of the final landscaping, in our humble opinion. So moving on to the next subject I had in the letter here, I wanted to address this issue about this, and I'm not saying it's been intentional necessarily, but there's been a tremendous false narrative here, in our opinion, in terms of, us looking to build these, a massive home on this lot that is so different from what the footprint was that was shown on the original subdivision plan. Now, putting aside that, the references to sample home footprints on the subdivision plan don't have any bearing or binding impact, but I'm concerned that it still leaves this impression that this is so drastically different than what we had Wes Guillaume from GRE Surveying do, was to actually do an actual takeoff of that home footprint that sat on the subdivision plan and measure out what it was. And Steve, I don't know if you can bring that up, please, on the screen. So the black represents what was shown on the subdivision plan as a sample home footprint for purposes, again, we believe for drainage design purposes. And it says 1,600 square foot footprint, which only applies to the portion of that box which is outside of the garage area on the right. The actual footprint of that area in black is 2,115 square feet. So if you look at our proposed home footprint, which is in red, the footprint of the actual house to be built on lot 1 is 2,207 square feet, which represents a mere 92 square foot differential from, this evidently, what they're trying to describe is this modest, tiny home footprint compared to what we're looking to build. So, and Steve, we actually did another takeoff of this that I think is even more helpful in terms of, what you're looking at here in terms of that, the box would be if, it sat 12 feet from the roadway, which obviously you can't because we weren't able to get a variance for 5 feet. So if that box were moved back to where the red is, Steve, if you could show that. So this moves that sample home footprint in blue back to where our proposed home footprint is. And I think as you can see here, it's virtually identical. Admittedly, ours is a wee bit bigger, 92 square feet, but this narrative about our massive home, compared to a modest tiny home footprint as what was shown before is just not accurate. So I guess lastly, as it relates to the building height issue, I'm actually going to turn it over to Lee Hartley, who did a pretty thorough job of trying to address the comments that had come up before on that topic. And as Steve is getting that document up on the screen here, just to segue over to Lee, there's been a fair amount of discussion about these major, exterior corners and under the definition of building height, and whether you should just be looking at 4 corners or how many corners. And I could just tell you from my own experience, speaking to architects in town, their experience, there's a litany of examples where more than 4 corners are utilized, and examples just like this particular home footprint that we're talking about here, where it's appropriate to use 6 exterior corners as part of that evaluation. So ultimately, I know that's the zoning enforcement officer's, interpretation as to, how that undefined term within that definition is to be utilized and applied. But the manner in which we're applying it here is totally consistent with how it's been applied and utilized elsewhere in town. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lee.
Okay, Steve, is it possible for you to start with Wes's plot plan? Then we'll go back to this. You can see it's from our original presentation, Wes had labeled each of the 6 corners. And then the two that the appellants are disputing are in the front of the garage, and in the front of the garage, and then one in the back corner. The garage slides out, so you have a change in plan, 3 foot and 3.5 feet in the front. This changes in plan. It changes in section. As when you get out to that 3-foot section, the building drops down to try to break up the scale of the long side a bit. And then it changes in elevation, which you can see to give us a little bit smaller presentation on the doors and the side. Okay, see, can we go back? As Mark mentioned, this happens routinely, more than 4 points in Winchester. I think the zoning is written in such a sense that it leaves major points undefined and leaves that discretion to the building commissioner. I think we agree with his decision here that this complied. I've included the calculations, adding those 6 together, and then divided by 6 will give you 86.8. Gives you a building height of 37.7, which again is less than the 40 feet. The basement, 4.3 feet is covered, 3.6 feet is above grade, above the mean grade. We use the approved grades here because one, we felt like we were instructed to by the town. 2, to go back to which the appellants asked us to originally, they go back to the grades before any construction, any road construction, any infiltration, any drainage. Doesn't make any sense because those no longer exist. So then they said, well, what about going to the interim grades? The project for the road, the infiltration system, much of the drainage had already started. Dirt was moved around and placed on the site, sometimes meaningfully, sometimes not so meaningfully. I believe in lot, Steve May can speak a little bit better this, lot 4 and 5, there was some extra fill left over, and that was just dispersed evenly on the lots. So the town has also said that the final grading and the wall has to be put in place. So along those lines, this is an ongoing construction project. So what Attorney Ross would have us do is then in the middle of a construction project where dirt has been pushed around, sometimes meaningfully, sometimes haphazardly, perform a survey and then go back and treat that as an existing conditions. And this would set a very dangerous precedent in town, I think, where you could move some dirt around in terms of a patio or whatever, then go and, create whatever grade you wanted to, then go back in and apply for a building permit. We've each opportunity tried to make our building. I mean, we couldn't have the variance, so the grades changed subtly, but to keep it as close to the site division approval as we could, and to work from that. I believe it was Mark had asked for the grades with 4 points. That's on the building height calculation on the 4 points. That's the next page. And yep. So even with the 4 points, the building height still works. Now we don't disagree. We disagree strongly with application of 4 points. It does trigger a change in the mean grade along the basement, which would expose more than half. But this could have been and could still be remedied with some adjustments to the basement slab or grade. But again, I'd like to say that we strongly disagreed with this. So Mark, did you want to take over from the building height, or should I go through the rest of the slides? Or
Yeah, I think that, if you could just touch upon them.
Sure,
I think
I'll do this quickly. So there's been some suggestion that the dormers on the second floor were actually in the attic level. So if you look along the second floor, I've highlighted in yellow, as you can see the band all the way across the building. The first structure that has been on and off called a dormer is actually a gable sitting over 2 full body, full walls, and then regular gable roof. There's a dormer which allows you to get into the second floor bedrooms next to that, which is a little shed dormer. And then the dormer into what would be eventually the guest room. all of that, all those bands of windows there all fall into the second floor. You can go to the next slide. So they've suggested that these dormers could be, the space on the attic could be extended into the above the dormers, creating additional living space. So you can see the yellow space is the amount of the dormer space created on the second floor. And then the green space with a scale figure there, it's a 5'10" person standing in that allegedly new living space. This can't happen. Like, there's just no one would ever design a dormer like that that you couldn't possibly stand up in. You can't access it because as the rafters come down for the main attic space, they cut that space off. So it's going to be used for running some ductwork, but could not be ever accessed as living space. Stephen, I'll go to the next slide. So just for reference, I took the dormer on the far right and moved it up to the attic level, so that all those three windows are in the attic level. And just so you get a sense, okay, well, that's a dormer on the upper level, which is what the zoning refers to, and compare it to the dormer on the right and ours in the proposed design. If we go to the half story, they've made a number of different claims about the height. In Ansara's last presentation, they measured it from the floor of the attic to the top of the ridge. There's no justification to that in any of the zoning. Steve, go one more page about the half story, because there was some confusion in the meeting last time. The diagram 13 on the right is the condition that is a classic attic. You have the rafters coming down, meeting the floor. In this diagram, they're spiked to the floor joists and sit on the exterior wall plates. This gives you the triangle, which is the half story. Winchester allows you to go up, it has to be less than 3 feet, so you can build small knee walls and create sort of trapezoid of space and still maintain the half story in this. So Steve, go back one more page. So as you can see in the attic space on diagram 11, that triangle exists on both sides, all along Abbey Road for the full extent on the far right, and then at the full extent across the back on the left, going down to 0 on both sides. Now, I think they said that, Ann said that because one of these dormers overlaps that space, then this voids that triangle. But if you go back, if you look at the on diagram 12, on the far left, see, go over on the cursor a little bit further. Yep, that all along that wall on the edge of the dormer, all along the other wall on the opposite side, it goes to 0. Across the front on the intermediate side goes to 0 as well. Then it turns, stays at 0, and then the other section all along the exterior wall goes to 0. So the it says, the zoning says a story directly under a sloping roof in which the points of intersection of the bottom of the rafters, not the top of the ridge, and the interior faces of the walls are less than 3 feet above the floor level on at least 2 exterior walls. So this happens across the entire front, the entire back, off both sides of the crossing gable, across the connecting dormer in the middle, and across both sides of the dormer on the far right. So every space in this attic slopes down to 0 or less than 3 feet. I think that's the size.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there's any questions on that, or if you have any.
So, so your calculations using the current, what you're calling the existing grade at the site now is 30, using the 6 point, 6 points is 37.9, and using the 4 points was what again?
37.7, and then see, flip over to the next page. It's 38.7. Yeah, dropped it by a foot.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, I think to open up a precedent where you're going to allow or require, I guess, an interim survey, or I guess allow in the middle of a construction project is, I think, very dangerous. For it really opens up the possibility of just moving dirt around, having a site resurveyed, and then getting pretty much anything you want.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Harvey. I do. Thank you,
Thank you.
Harley. Thank you. Bob, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Nope, I'm good.
Dorothy? Dorothy, are you there? Do you have any questions? I can't see you, so.
There I am. You cannot see me?
I can see you now.
Oh, okay. Who am I directing my questions to? Is this just for,
Either party, if you have a question at this point.
oh, no, it's okay.
Okay. All right, so at this point, I don't have any questions. I will open it up if there are, so thank you, Attorney Roloff, Attorney Vaughn. I'm going to open it up to public again. I will reiterate, we've heard a number of these arguments. If you have new information to present, we would be interested in hearing it. We would ask, in the interest of time, that you be brief. If you feel that either of your positions have been adequately expressed by either of the councils, please, we respect, and we've heard a number of you in previous meetings. So that said, I will open it up, and I see Miss Sarah. You have your hand raised, Ann?
Yep, I would like to share my screen, and I will be brief, but I do have absolutely new information. I sent out some slides yesterday. They've changed completely, and I would change them even again right now because of what have been said tonight. So this is very new information, and I'd like to
Okay.
talk to you about it.
Certainly. Janine, can you allow Ann to share?
She already has permission.
All right, go ahead, Ann.
Okay, so I don't know if you've seen, well, let me move this over somewhere else. Yeah, I gotta get rid of it. Okay, so I wanted to talk about these things tonight. I'm gonna race through whatever I can race through if I feel that we've seen it already, and just sort of stress the things that I think are important right now. All right, we saw this last time. It's the view from the Goodwins. When you look at the difference between the stories, I want you to note that the top story is the largest story. So I have made this measurement several times at the architectural's given scale of 1/4 inch equals a foot. It's 14 feet. And that is highly unusual for a top story. I want you to look at the massing here. Tonight, we have made a lot of statements about the modesty of the home, and the old footprints didn't show the build out of the patios and other extensive features of the house. But what it also didn't incorporate was the large massing of this home, which I'm going to later talk about in more detail, hopefully very quickly. I also want to show from Abbey Road, if you look at the house with just to the yellow roof line, it looks like a kind of a normal house. The problem is it has this extra green area up to this apex, this rooftop is, I think, unusual for a house. That is kind of unusual. So we'll talk more about that later. I don't think that top story has the appearance of a half story. And, we can talk about it in whatever terms you want, but I think just, colloquially, it doesn't look like a half story at all to me. If you consider this dormer and this dormer, he's calling it a gable roof line. But the problem is you can stand here. tonight he showed a figure of some area where it was 3 feet, but this is 6 foot tall where I'm moving my mouse here. So you can stand in that area. And if you measure this area, just these 2 areas are greater than half the roof line. This area is very strange. It's an extraordinarily complicated roof line, and it also juts out from the roof. So this to me looks very imposing. I just wanted to say that in this area, I noticed that in the architect's drawings, there was this, the attic space shaded in green is the space that the appellant described as can be used to increase the living space. And he had a series of drawings. You saw some of them tonight that showed a person standing in places they couldn't use. But by what's happening here is that by pulling that roof line so high, what is happening is that he's getting, I don't think you can see me, and I'm making gestures because I'm Italian, but but basically if you had a normal roof line that was like a typical, oh, I don't know, 9 feet tall, which I think is my house is 8.5, I think. Then if you wanted to make a standard size room at 7 feet, that room would be very small. It would be the size of, say, a studio, or, a teenage bedroom could go up there. But what happened here is he pulled that roof line very, very tall, giving us lots of space that was 8 feet. And he's able to put 2 bedrooms and a full bath up there. And that's why it's so imposing. And they also, you have all these new bedrooms and everything, but the family is still going to need storage. Where are they going to put it? Well, they're going to put it in all those strange bump outs in the front. And that's why we have that strange roof line. It accommodates all the storage that they would also need. So it's a big, big house and a too tall 4th story. All right, when we go to decide whether the lowest floor is a story, we use the mean finished grade. We don't have to worry about, what we use for existing. We don't have to worry about that. We simply look at mean finished grade. And then we say that the proponent performed this improperly. Here's why. This looks like a box to me. So I don't really understand why these would be added. That's enough for this slide. But basically their calculation is a full foot off. If they do lose these 2, then the lowest story, then if they do lose these 2, then the lowest story does become a floor, because then the correct mean finished grade is below the midpoint of the basement. So what we've seen quickly, as fast as I can do it, is that basically, I really believe that top floor does not have the appearance of a half story. I don't believe the bottom floor is a story either, because I don't really understand the reason why he added these 2 extra points that would manipulate it. I think 2.5 stories are allowed by right, and therefore I think it violates the limit. I also think, and this is new, I also think that the house is greater than 5,000 square feet. They calculate that it's 40, it's really close, 40. But if you look at the basement, the design of the basement, it has a room with a door on it. And it also seems to have an extra space here. It looks like a closet. And that leads me to think that this walkout basement with a tall ceiling is definitely going to be dwelling space. I get the feeling that this is going to be mechanicals. Even if this is going to be the office, and that's going to be, storage and mechanicals like a typical place, there's still some extra space to count here. So I don't really buy that this house is less than 5,000 square feet. Wanted to go over some of these. This is really important, the building application, because they provided, we're here to discuss whether or not the building permit should have been issued. That's what we're here talking about. And they only really gave 2 things, a proposed site plan and a plot plan of land. And between them, there are many, many inconsistencies. A very large one is this tree can't be placed here because of its proximity to the infiltration system. That means that they're not honoring the landscaping plan. We have different distances, 17 versus 15, very different porch and patio configurations. This inspection porch gets covered by the patio. And then we have different sidewalk configuration, we have a bump out, a different bump out. Sorry, that's not here, but we have a different sidewalk configuration between these two plans. And very important here is that we have a different first floor elevation and we have a different basement elevation. So we don't really know what the elevations are, do we? I think that given the inconsistencies between the plans, that the permit should not have been issued. And I don't think we really know what has been partially built out there. But also, I'm worried about those elevations between the basement floor and the first floor, because we're doing lots of calculation of what's the lowest floor and what's the calculation of height. And I'm not confident that we can really make these calculations given the submissions. All right. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we've been talking about how they had to retain the elevations. The elevations weren't really retained, and they could not have been retained because the building was considerably different. Now, right here, we're looking at the recent submission. The recent submission to the ZBA, and I included this because it was handy, and also because it, it just showed the the original grades. Now I want to show up two inconsistencies in this area here. I thought that had a yellow mark on it. The yellow mark is gone. But in this area, that the original design was 90, and then it came in at 89. So we lost a foot over the infiltration plan. Somebody should mute themselves out there in TV land. There's another area that I wanted to point out here, and you actually, Attorney Vaughn actually pointed out this too, and I found that interesting. And that was that this grading is sharp. They have sharp curves in it, very sharp curves. And that was talked about by this guy at VHB. And then you saw Beth Rudolph also talked about it in her letter. And the reason why it's shaped like that is because it needs to shed water on this side of the wall. But here, that grading is smoothed and may not shed that water correctly. So there are grading changes. Other change is that the landscaping plan is not retained. That important tree at the northwest corner of the lot, right next to the Goodwin home, is not going to be able to be sited. The tree is critical to help guard against light intrusion from headlights on Highland into the Goodwin's home. And it also would provide the Goodwins some privacy, and also would provide them some relief from the summer sun. The large trees in this area are also really important for stormwater management. So losing that tree is a big deal. We went through this, that the trees are actually on this plan. Here they are. All right, so he says this would not be able to be sited because of the proximity to the wall. That doesn't seem to be true at all. That's new from tonight. Okay, this is how also another problem with the violations for the subdivision plans is that they are not, very obviously are not accommodating increased impervious surface. This whole area circled, the patio and the deck are not accommodated. This is the only area that is accommodated from the new infiltration system. So if you were to go here and look at the proposed driveway, it's very different than the ones, and the walkway, they're very different than the one shown in the original subdivision plan. And so all of that isn't considered. So basically it doesn't implement the grading, it doesn't implement the landscaping plan, and it doesn't accommodate the impervious surface. So it violates the subdivision permit. And you might say, well, then go to the planning board. But the problem is that the building permit should not have been issued if it was in clear violation of the subdivision permit like this. If it's so deviated. I also want to speak, I don't have a slide to this, but I want to speak to Mr. Vaughn's bringing up that, some of these houses would not have been able to be sited in within the allowable building footprint. And to me, that's an argument that, gee, well, why were they put that way in the first place? Clearly, it was because of discussions that were happening between, all kinds of members between town and the neighbors. And so I don't know, it seems to really violate that, what I'm going to call almost a contractual obligation. When this is a nice segue into what's important for the neighbors, because we think that, yes, the development agreement and any subdivision approval plan should allow typical and reasonable change. And what's important to these neighbors are these things: all the mature trees retained as possible, and the home size is consistent with the neighborhood, not the footprint. And it shouldn't be mischaracterized as, oh, well, the footprints are the same. That's not the issue. The issue is the massive scale of the home and its size. We don't think any of these are being upheld, including the zoning regulations, because of the top floor. So I want to point this out, and it's weird, but the fact is that this town did do negotiation with the neighbors long before it was decided that they would pursue this Abbey Road town swap. And the thing is that on the original 40B application, there were extraordinary inconsistencies in that application. The largest one being that the owner at that time, that is not Mr. Meinalt, I want to make that very clear, but actually committed perjury on that. And so I think it would have been very simple for the town to have fought this. They successfully fought another 40B up at Forest, which was harder. This would have been significantly easier. But because it seemed like a reasonable subdivision, okay, we'll go with a reasonable thing. And now we're not getting that. Instead, we're getting, things that are not, we don't think are reasonable. I'm going to skip these two. Oh my goodness. So I want to also show you something from, this is a screenshot from the 2016 Springtown meeting. And here are the reasons that they said, this is the town meeting in which they adopted the new trigger for a site plan review. And they said, the transformation of existing grades affects neighboring properties. This was placed on the, a retaining wall was placed there. And it says, any grade changes which allow a structure to tower over its neighbors through grade changes is unnecessary. And they said, it's basically on a pedestal compared to its neighbors. And also, you invest in your street, not just your house. This is exactly what's going on here. And so I think that to say that this does not warrant a site plan review because it is odd. It certainly is not within the spirit of the adoption of that site plan law, nor its purpose. When we do a site plan review, and I've just put the findings here, we go through all of these different findings that are never considered in a subdivision plan approval process. This should have been done before the roadway was built. So many of these findings, and I've just pulled out some of them here, but so many of these are absolutely crucial here. Departure from the character, all the removed trees, the glare from the headlights, et cetera, the stormwater. We see no exception that is provided in our bylaw that might allow you to avoid site plan review merely because the land being changed is subject to a subdivision approval. Now, I know that Brian submitted the letter that said, I don't think it's necessary. Brian isn't here tonight, but you know what? Brian worked very hard on this project for many years. And I think that a lot of people in this town are tired of this project and simply looking for the fastest way to get it complete. But the fastest way to get it complete isn't the right way. And I'm asking you to understand that your role as ZBA, not the town planner, but your role as ZBA is to make these findings which are crucial in our case. We're looking for a remedy here because we were promised one thing and delivered another. And is there a remedy? And I think many people many of the neighbors would say no, because they're very upset about the tree removal. But maybe that site plan review process should happen now. And maybe it should be performed for all the lots with fully designed lots. And I also think a subdivision modification should be required, but and we also have to perform all the other reviews. We have to look at the dormer issue. We have to look at the height issue, etc. These are what should be used as a baseline for building height. I think what's really important tonight is what I heard from the architect, who thinks that he used the approved subdivision contours for his calculations. I don't believe that. I actually think he used an interim condition for his calculations, because the existing contours shown on the site plan do not match those as existing in the subdivision approval. So I actually think he used, and I'm sure he did this unknowingly, but I think he used the interim condition that he was arguing against. So we got a real problem here with calculating height and whether the lower story qualifies. Anyway, if you do actually use existing, which, might I point out that the height of the building says you have to use mean grade of existing. Now, remember to calculate whether or not the lowest floor is a full floor or not. For there, you use proposed conditions, but for the height of the building, you used existing conditions. And what should we be using those contours that were approved in the subdivision plan? If we did, it would not consider the impact on the Goodwin home or the other homes. And that's the purpose for a site plan review for the neighborhood. So I think we should go back and use real existing contours. If you use either the contours submitted in site plan review or those that were truly existing before any roadway was built, it fails with building height. Here's the place where I just kind of show you that we're showing a 5% grade change here in this area. This is what subdivision approval showed as existing. This was existing here. And look at, this is existing here. It's not the same. So the building permits existing are not the same as the subdivision approvals existing. So again, I think that what happened here is that the architect actually might have used the ones on the plot plan, which I don't know. All right, so I don't have to go through this. Anyway, if you use the true built existing elevations, you get something around 44 feet, maybe even higher. And then some other major stormwater issues, none of which have been addressed. I think all of these were submitted by a professional engineer and never addressed. That infiltration port's covered by a patio. The infiltration system drains to the under drain of a retaining wall. It doesn't actually go into the ground. So it kind of defeats the purpose of an infiltration system. And that wall also needs design by a qualified structural engineer. There's lots of mature trees have been removed. So there's a real question here of whether the groundwater table has been affected. There's already a culverted stream in the area that pops over top. And because of the rush of water in the area, there's a high water table. Even people way up at the top of North Border Road often report water in their basement. So you've got to do a mounding study here. And I will point out that that was also noted by a professional engineer, OCG. And again, the house is too close to the existing infiltration system. What's going to happen? with the house so close is that the existing infiltration system is going to cause hydrostatic pressure on the home foundation. So none of these issues have been looked at. So we don't think the stormwater is treated adequately. I'm done. That wasn't too bad, right?
Thank you, Anna. I
Chairman.
appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, Art.
Just a logistical one. I saw a set of slides from Ms. Sarah that she submitted this morning at around 10 o'clock.
These
I
are
just-
totally different, I'm afraid. I really, we saw a lot of new information from Mr.
I'm not debating it. I just want to know if they're different. If they are, then I'll see them. I'll review them again.
I'll submit them again, or, the link is live, so I'll send a PDF as well.
Yeah, if you'd send a PDF, Anna,
Yeah.
I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Mr.
have to learn how to stop this. Can-
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one comment if I could, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I want to get to the, yes, Attorney Vaughn, I'll let you have one comment. I do have another member of the audience who is asking.
I'll just try to, I just feel like it's, trying to throw as many arguments against the wall here and see what might stick here. But so I just wanted to address the town engineer, the infiltration drainage design. I mean, look, all I can tell you is that the design needs to be reviewed by the town engineer before any permit is issued. And I, work in a lot of different communities. I work with a lot of different town engineers and city engineers. And I can tell you that your town engineer, Beth Rudolph, is not going to let something be built here from an infiltration system design that doesn't work and isn't compliant with code and isn't valid. So I just, I want to dismiss that and, have you be comfortable that, the drainage design is something that's going to be looked at and has been looked at. And, she's commented on that. And with respect to the landscaping plan, we've made it clear before that we're planting trees in the back of the lot between the back of this house and where the Goodwin's property is. We intend to have a robust planting plan back there. And my client would like to work with Mr. Goodwin to develop a plan that is in, mutual agreement to the party. So to think that that's just going to be a vast wasteland back there, it's not true. But again, our opinion is that the landscaping is not something that's germane to the building permit, and we'll work through that as needed. If a tree needs to be shifted around or whatever it might be. So just look on the site plan. I'll just find it interesting that a subdivision road that's existed for probably close to a year now, all of a sudden, there's an opinion that needs to go through a site plan approval process when it's been there. And but again, I'll leave it back to you, Mr. Chairman. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I just raise one quick question, or just one quick point?
Yes, Mr. Harley.
I'll be very quick. I know these meetings can be contentious, and these are serious issues at hand. But accusing people of perjury, and then last time there was indication or some saying that Steve Manel was out to get people and dangerous. I just don't think this is appropriate in a hearing like this. I mean, we can discuss these things and we can be civilized about it. That's all I was going to say.
I appreciate that, Mr. Harley. And I feel like everyone has been very civil. I've been at far more contentious hearings than this one over lighting. So I feel like this has been very civil, and I appreciate what Ms. Sarah was saying. I don't think, I did not take it as an attack on anybody, but I do understand what you're saying. I do appreciate that, Mr. Harley. Mr. Betancourt, you did have your hand raised. Do you still have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Wadbury. Just wanted to speak briefly as I was part of the dialogue with the neighborhood around this issue, and just wanted to provide some historical context as a member of the select board. We were working on this with Mr. Miller. What happened from the town's vantage point is Mr. Miller approached us to work on a project there, and said that if we didn't allow him to build really a large set of buildings, then he would submit a project eligibility letter to or an application for a 40B, and he did that, and he was issued a project eligibility letter at a time when affordable housing was really the number one policy goal of the town. We wanted to have essentially managed 40B projects to get some affordable housing units. So when that was issued, we had a conversation with the neighborhood, who was very upset about the size of the building and the potential of what was going to be there. And so really against the town's objectives, we negotiated in many meetings with the neighbors and with Mr. Miller to do this kind of complicated drainage work and land swap. And we always envisioned that this would be single family homes within, you know, the requirements of the zoning. So we never discussed the size or scale. We always anticipated that that was going to be dealt with on the project side. It's a little bit above my pay grade to kind of comment on some of the roof heights and some of the things that Ms. Sarah mentioned. And we had many meetings. I know that Ms. Sarah maybe was not notified of them because she's not in a butter, as I'm not either. But I think we got to a place that was at that point satisfactory to the neighbors. And they, you know, their goal was single family houses. And the economics of Winchester, what we knew then as we know now, are that these lots are expensive and the land is expensive. And for somebody to build there economically, you can't build a tiny house. And so we've seen that all over Winchester, where most of the smaller homes that have been here for a while are getting bought up and knocked down, and people are building kind of edge to edge. And so it's something that we're confronting, but it's, you know, something that we were trying to, you know, avoid, that we really can't. There's the economics of these parcels there. So, you know, I just wanted to share that. And I don't know if I'm able to share the screen as well. You know, I can show a quick, I just want to have one picture to show kind of what the neighbors didn't like.
Can you give Mr. Betancourt the ability to share?
Great, thank you. Okay, got it. I just have to figure it out. Okay, I'm not sure if you can, you know, see that, Mr. Wadbury. Is that on the screen? It seems to be off of mine.
Sorry, yes, I can't take myself off mute, but yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, this was kind of what was proposed as part of the project eligibility letter that was issued there. It's a gigantic building. The neighbors hated it. We did everything we could to stop, and this would be multiple buildings that would be in that location, very high off the ground, because of the parking was not below grade in a lot of the areas. So we got direction from the neighborhood to prevent this from happening, and they wanted single family homes to be there. And so this is what we delivered as part of this project. You know, I just, you know, wanted to say that in context of how the town worked with the neighbors and with Mr. Miller. This deal took probably 1.5 years for us to put together. And our intent then, as it is now, is to come up with something that works for the neighbors, that was not a giant 40B project that was ugly and overbearing. And I think we think now that we'd like to see some single family housing there. And we think this is in the context of what we envisioned at that point. So thank you, Mr. Waterbury, and to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And of course, always thank you for your service as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I ask
Absolutely,
Mr.
Dorothy.
Betancourt a question? Or maybe multiple questions? So it's been discussed, and I don't know the formal name of the agreement. Attorney Roloffs can probably give us that. But there was some kind of agreement, it wasn't recorded, or some sort of document. Actually, I think Attorney Vaughn referenced it earlier. And there's some sort of language that people are talking about modest size homes. So
yeah.
You just mentioned that the size of the home was never discussed, but yet there's this agreement, or there's some sort of document out there that's not recorded that references the term modest. And I'm wondering if you know anything about that or if you're familiar with that.
Thank you, Ms. Simbali, for the question. I mean, that was definitely never a term that was ever discussed around our table. And it wouldn't have been really, frankly. I mean, that's if we were going to use something like modest, we would have defined that term as part of the agreement because it is so subjective. I mean, we spent probably, as I said, a year and a half negotiating this with Mr. Miller's attorney, who's a pit bull, and we, Art will tell you, this was a lot that went into this. There's no, and there were a few attorneys on the board at that time as well. We wouldn't have had it gone to all that trouble and then just threw out a word like modest in context of what our expectation was for the property. I mean, I've never, in fact, I mean, I've never heard a term like that used in context of any of these agreements. So it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. I see Art jumping in, so you can correct me, Art, but I don't remember that being a part of the conversation.
Can I just interject? Attorney Roloffs, is that the correct term that was being used?
I think that I explained at the last meeting. The word modest, I believe that might have come from us, from
that's what I was going to say.
Application. Yeah. So let me just clarify that. Yeah, it's not in the development agreement. It's not in the subdivision approval. It was a term that we were using to characterize the homes that were described in the project narrative that was submitted in support of the subdivision application. And I see Ann Sarah's raising her hand and probably has some feedback on this as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Hold on, Ann. Art, yes.
Yeah, I certainly didn't intend to jump in on Mike Betancourt's comment. I was just raising my hand so that I could follow him. And I was going to say exactly what Jeff said. The term, Jeff said last time that the term came from him. And I'm glad, I mean, I appreciate his confirming that now. But I think we're sort of getting well off track here for what the board needs to decide.
Yes.
But I will say that the subdivision approval included entire analysis of massing.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ann.
Okay. I have another question for Mr. Betancourt that's not on the modest piece. So you also said that when you approved this project that it was with an eye towards it being compliant with the zoning bylaw, correct?
Well, with what was, I mean, I guess my point is that we weren't getting involved in, what was going to go there. It was, what was allowed. And we did, discuss the variance on those lots that, we would have joined with the applicant on. But other than that, there's, we didn't have any renderings of what we thought would be there. That wasn't a consideration for us. So, it was we had agreed to a subdivision, and that's what we thought. In fact, there were many different iterations of the road going in there and what we would do with the different hammerhead designs and everything. I remember we just went for a while on that to get the maximum amount of homes in the area. So that's all I remember really from those conversations.
So did anyone discuss section 9.5.2 of the zoning bylaw, which sort of details out that sort of, there shouldn't be any sort of, I think that applies to roadways, any sort of movement of land scaling, that's supposed to come in front of this board for that all to be approved. Did anyone discuss, oh, you're going to have to go in front of the zoning board of appeals for that?
I don't remember that in particular. Maybe it was something that we discussed. As I said, it was a couple of years ago. I'm just kind of giving you a general sense of what our motivation was at that point. And certainly we thought that there were pieces of it where they're, moving the lots closer to the road where there need to be, a variance, which, we thought would happen reasonably. But yeah, beyond that, I think it was just, splitting up the lots, the land swap, getting the infrastructure in that area resolved. That was a huge issue. In fact, I mean, we had that property at 22 Highland for many, many years, and it was non-functioning. It was all moldy inside. We couldn't do anything with it, and we couldn't build on it just because of the drainage there. So, I mean, it was always not just an eyesore, but it was a real mess for the town that we had no way to solve. So that was our solution, to work with Mr. Miller to try to get some homes there. And, we, I think that, when we talk about modest homes, I mean, my, I guess since I moved to Winchester, my idea of modest has changed as well. And I don't want to go back to that, but I mean, it's,
I'm sort of done with the modest piece.
Yeah.
Like that's.
I got you.
I'm more looking at, there is site plan review bylaws
Sure.
in place that everyone should have been aware of when you guys were approving this project and
Sure.
going through it. And that, in my opinion, that probably should have been discussed and referenced, that there are multiple hoops you have to jump through to have this type of subdivision approved. And so sorry about the dog. He wanted to participate.
No worries.
Thank you, Dorothy.
I just wanted to know, did anyone discuss site plan approval when you guys were putting this deal together?
I don't think that was discussed. I think it was something that, maybe Mr. Zacchelli was a little bit more involved with, as far as the plan and recommendations of how to put this together. So, again, we kind of had a policy focus, from the select board side, and then there was the planning focus and the layout of what would be possible there. So, but I can't say that was discussed or not at that point.
I mean,
And I'm sorry, I have one more question, sorry. So there's a reciprocal easements and restriction agreement on record, and in that agreement, it talks about declaration of covenants, restrictions, and reservations of Abbey Road Homeowners Association. Are you familiar with that document? Or what was supposed to be in that document?
I'd have to see it to, refresh my memory. I don't, again, I haven't really thought about this in a little while, unfortunately, but I've been kind of catching up as I've been attending the hearings. But, and I just, as I said, I wanted to just kind of offer my perspective and from the town side at that point where we were and what our objective was. But yeah, I'd have to look at the covenant and restriction agreement if I was to add any value to the zoning board there.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment? I know the question wasn't directed at me, and, as the developer's attorney, you can, believe what you want that I'm about to say or not, but I've spoken to the town planner, Brian Zacchelli, and I can tell you that the idea that site plan approval would ever come into play for this subdivision was never raised, and I don't believe the town was of the opinion that it would be applicable. But again, that's coming from me, and, I'm not quite sure if, some of these folks here were under truth serum that they would actually feel that, site plan approval would have been required either. But so that's just my opinion. But not, well, my opinion, but also from talking to the town planner, that there was never any intention of site plan approval being applicable here for a subdivision.
Attorney Vaughn, can I just ask?
Go, Dorothy.
Attorney Vaughn, can I just ask you, so whether or not Brian Zacchelli said it was applicable or anybody else, are you familiar with section 9.5.2? And did you review that section and contemplate whether or not this should be applicable to this project?
Yeah, no, I am familiar with that section of the zoning bylaw. And again, I've said for the record that in my opinion, it should not apply where you've got an approved subdivision where we're being required to build out the grades for the road and the lot, unless we are changing those grades from what the approved subdivision said in a manner that triggers any one of those provisions, Dorothy, whether it's a house bigger than 5,000 square feet, whether, we're changing the grades from what the approved subdivision plan, which was reviewed by the town engineer, VHB, various town departments, which the abutters all had notice of, and, clearly knew what the grades were going to be on all those lots. So our opinion is that it would not apply unless we're changing that in a manner that's increasing the slope 6% of an area 500 square feet, however it reads.
Art.
Thank you. There's a lot of different pieces to this that people are exploring, but I just want to put the site plan issue in perspective. 9.5.1 point 1 through 6 are the triggers for site plan approval based on construction of buildings of certain sizes in certain zoning districts. 9.5.1.7, which is the one we're talking about, is not related to building construction. It is the one about grade change, 6% over 500 square feet. The argument by the appellant is that that site plan approval should have been conducted at the subdivision approval stage, because that's when the grade was being changed. That would have nothing to do with this house. That would have nothing to do with with the massing of the house, the relationship to the neighborhood, headlights shining in anybody's windows, or any other feature of the build out of this lot. Under 9.5.1.7, all you would be talking about is the drainage, the grade change, and drainage, runoff, avalanche, anything related to grade change. But you would not be talking about the house in that site plan review. So there's a disconnect in what everybody's talking about here, because they're talking about the grade change triggering site plan review, but they want the site plan review to look at the house. That's not appropriate.
Can I respond to that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Roloffs.
Thank you. So I did mention tonight that I think the subdivision work itself, if you were to focus in on just the construction of the roadway and the stormwater system, involved significant enough changes that triggered site plan review. But we also are arguing that even if you were to then take those interim grades and focus on the build out of the individual lots, the build out of lot 1 triggers site plan review independently of the roadway trigger. So I did say, ideally, this entire project would have been, it could have undergone through site plan review as one development with the buildings themselves, but it didn't have to. If they wanted to just do the subdivision as one site plan review process because of the significant changes, then you're right, Art. That would have been focused more on sort of the layout and the grading changes associated with the roadway, et cetera. But in this case, in Sean Malone's letter that we submitted April 13th, has a figure that shows that the build out of lot 1 itself, independent of the roadway infrastructure work, triggers site plan review. So putting aside whether the roadway should have undergone site plan review, before this building permit was issued for this lot, the work associated with the build out of this lot should have undergone site plan review. And I think in that context, the development activity there is a grading change associated with construction of a building. I think site plan review in that context would consider the aspects of the build out.
I appreciate that. I would wonder whether or not the overall site subdivision requirement would have, if you were to site plan review the entire subdivision, you've talked about that, whether they could have broken it up or they could have required it for the entire subdivision. And the drainage calculations, as we've seen from the emails from Beth Rudolph, relate to the overall subdivision and the need to manage drainage across the entire property. Yes, Art, sorry.
So last time I asked Jeff Roloffs whether their claim on site plan review was based on the work that was done as part of the subdivision process, or was he separately claiming that enough grading was done from the finished subdivision grades to trigger site plan review? And the answer was no, only the former, that there has not been sufficient grading after the subdivision approval, after that work was done, to trigger site plan review. So that's
I think that's a if I said that, I misspoke, because Sean Malone's letter is very clear, and I'll pull it up if you want so that everyone can see it. Sean Malone's letter is very clear on this point. The focus that what he focused on in his letter was the build out of this lot, and the extent of change that he calculated was based upon the proposed site plan submitted by the developer, which showed existing grades and proposed grades. And it's the changes, and it's those changes associated with the build out of lot 1 that he evaluated to conclude site plan review was triggered. So look at the roadway's already in. So maybe I shouldn't have even spoke to that issue tonight, although I think it's true that it should have undergone site plan review. The bigger issue for this appeal is that the work on lot 1 independently triggered site plan review. Sean Malone's here with us tonight. I don't know, Sean, if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, good evening all. Sean Malone, Oak Consulting Group. I am a professional civil engineer. And as Jeff just mentioned, we looked at this using the plan submitted with the building application showing the existing grades and the proposed grades. So that is what this is based on. It's based on this site-specific build out of lot 1, which in my opinion, I think that's why you have this site plan review bylaw. Whereas Mr. Krieger was saying if it was just, you have a subdivision, you don't need it. But when you have a site plan review, you're looking at that house footprint. You're looking at how that interacts with all the grades. So that really, it locks it down. So that's why I think that you have this bylaw. Somebody can come in and do a subdivision, fine. But then when you come and develop each lot, it still has to meet the requirements of the town and the site plan review.
So then let me ask the question of both of you again, because I heard a clear answer last time and I'm hearing a different position tonight. From the grades that were shown on the approved subdivision plan, is it your argument that 500 square feet was altered over changed by more than 6% from that starting point?
Okay.
I would say so, yes. And they gave a great document that showed this, how the building itself is set back about 10 or 12 feet from where it was shown on the approved plans. So in order to make the grading work, those grades have to change in order to meet where the new building location is, as opposed to how it was shown on the approved plan. So yes, I do believe that's true.
What approved plan are we talking about?
I was referring to the subdivision plan.
It showed a sample home footprint that violates a front yard setback?
Right. Whatever was shown on
Mark, what Sean is referring to are the approved grades on the subdivision plan, because you guys are trying to take credit for those grades as having been approved.
Correct.
Right? Okay, so Sean's referring to those approved grades on the subdivision plan and saying that what is now being constructed at lot 1 deviates enough that the changes would trigger site plan review. In response to your question at the last meeting, just so I can clarify my response on that, I didn't have the benefit of Sean's feedback on that question. It's a different question than what I was getting at before. So this kind of comes back to what grades are you treating as the existing grades, right? In terms of whether your project triggers site plan review. I don't think that you should start from, as a starting point for that analysis, I don't think that in this case for lot 1, you get to start your analysis from the grades that were shown on this subdivision plan, because this subdivision plan showed grades that were linked to a building. They weren't, it's not unlike most towns where you've got a subdivision plan approved, they don't typically require the house grading to be established as part of the definitive process. They might require sort of lot grading to be accomplished at some degree to accommodate the roadway. But in this case, we've got a building shown on a definitive plan and you've got grading directly linked to it. Those Those are proposed grades. They were shown on the definitive plan. They were approved in relation to those footprints shown on that plan. But now when you're going to a different building, I don't actually think you even get the benefit of starting your analysis from the proposed grades shown on the definitive plan. I think, but Sean's saying that even if you do, even if you give them that credit and start the analysis there, they still are making significant enough changes to those grades to trigger site plan review. But the analysis in Sean's letter is a little bit different, because what it does is it ties to what's shown by the developer as the existing grades at that time, whenever that survey was conducted. Those existing grades are, we think, the grades that were out there after the roadway was built and the stormwater infrastructure was built. And then their plot plan also shows the proposed grades. So they're different. There's different sets of grades here that are being shown. The starting point, I think that's why there seemed to be an inconsistency in the responses there.
Mark, I'd like to clarify. If you look at the analysis that Mr. Malone provided, his analysis is working off the interim grades for existing. I mean, it's written right on his drawing, which is a part of Mr. Roloff's exhibit.
Right.
So I don't think we can say, I mean, each of these areas is going over and using the interim grades as part of the change. It's right there, they're highlighted, it's noted. So I think that is consistent with the previous response from last meeting.
Correct. That's right. And what Sean's added to the conversation this evening is that even if you were to start the analysis from the grades shown on the subdivision plan,
right? That's not been calculated or demonstrated here. What's provided was the interim grades and those changes, and they're labeled, highlighted. Text says existing, highlighted over the light gray contours. So, and that's very consistent with your responses from the last meeting.
So, Mr. Harley, I would like just remind everybody, let's direct the comments through the board, please. Thank you.
Yep,
just
sorry.
In the efforts of keeping everything civil, Mr. Ross, I want to make sure you had an opportunity to finish your point. I appreciate your position, Mr. Harley, but Mr. Ross, did you have more to say?
All I wanted to say was that if the board's inclined to determine that the analysis, the site plan review grade change analysis should start with the approved grades as shown on the subdivision plan, I'd like the opportunity to have Sean submit a supplemental letter on that point as to whether or not the deviation shown on the proposed build out of lot 1 and the changes are significant enough if you were to start the analysis from those grades.
So you would like the opportunity to submit additional information if we were to take that the subdivision grades are what we should be using for a site plan?
As a starting point, yes.
Art, would we have to continue the meeting if we were to do that?
You'd have to hold the record open, but then of course, the applicant would get to respond. So the answer is yes, you probably would have to continue the meeting. Can I just clarify? My question last time and my question this time had nothing to do with interim grades. My question was explicitly, if you start from the approved subdivision grades, are you saying there was enough grading since then to trigger site plan review? Now, Jeff made a point that you couldn't quite tell because there was a house sitting on the subdivision plan. It wasn't pure lot grades. But last time the answer to that question was no, the appellant was not claiming that. Then there was some clarification in that position tonight. And now apparently the analysis hasn't been done about whether, because they want to keep the record open to submit that, which is fine with me if the board chair wants that. But I'm just, my question is very specific because I'm trying to illuminate the issue the board has to decide here.
Yes.
The board has to decide what grades to start with. And my question was, if you start with X grades, you got this argument. If you start with Y grade, are they still making that argument? And apparently we don't know the answer yet.
Mr. Meinhold, I saw you had your hand raised. I see you too, so I'll go back to you.
Sure, yeah, I just wanted to clarify the grading. So all the grades that we use and all our calculations are based off the approved grades. The retaining wall and the filling of lot 1 was approved in the subdivision approval process. Those new grades are the new baseline. That is our assertion. That's how we based all our calculations. That's what we've been told to do by the town engineer and by the town planner. The work of the subdivision has been started. It has yet to be completed. The grading of the lots was left to each builder or homeowner or whoever was going to be the final owner of those lots to finish that portion of the work, which has to be completed to comply with the subdivision approval process. So the argument could be made that today we could be out there building that wall and filling in the lot and submit a plot plan that has those approved grades as existing conditions. And we very well could do that and would be within our rights to complete that portion of the work that has yet to be completed, that was previously approved by the planning board in the subdivision approval, and resubmit a plot plan with those final grades as existing conditions. So that is what we've done, is that is our baseline, and that's what we've used to determine all our height calculations. So I just wanted to clarify that that is in fact what we've done, and that is what the town had instructed us to do.
Thank you, Steve. Ann?
Hi, just a little bit of common sense here. You don't need to build the wall, the retaining wall, in order to build the roadway. Obviously, you don't, because you already built the roadway. So if a subdivision approval, it really is about the road and only the road, then all of the grades that are so-called approved on a subdivision plan, like this retaining wall, and I'm going to argue that there are many others on every other lot, because you didn't need to make many changes other than those required to just simply build the roadway, right? Those other changes should be considered for site plan review. I personally think that when you have a road that, like this one, that required so much cut and fill and so much tree removal, that it has huge impact across the entire lot. Yes, I personally do believe that the entire subdivision should have undergone site plan review, not just a subdivision approval. But you could do it lot by lot or do the whole thing at once. I think there's a benefit to doing the whole thing at once because of the stormwater issue really requires the whole thing done at once. But that's my point. Perhaps there would have been a way in a different kind of a scenario where, yes, you would permit a subdivision, which would really just give you lot lines and a nice flat roadway, and it really wouldn't have an impact on the rest of the lot, but that's not the case here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one comment on that? Pursuant to the subdivision rules and regulations of the town, it says that under the grading drainage utility section, it says that we must show proposed contours indicating the finished grades of all proposed construction in the subdivision. So that includes roads and lots. Again, I will, mention, Beth Rudolph, the town engineer, indicating that for this subdivision, it was the integration of the drainage system for the house lots and the road were all done into one.
Thank you.
That's the issue.
So Dorothy, Bob, I'm going to ask you guys, you've heard the request from Mr. Roloff's. Do you feel the need? Are you good? Do you need more information? Do you want to continue this, or are you? I'm not sure that I need anything more at this
I
point.
think we need something. I mean, if Attorney Roloffs is arguing that the grade is changing more than 6% over 500 square feet, and that Sean is going to show us that, then I think we should continue and have Sean show us that. If they can't show us that, then we answer Art's question.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, they've had opportunity to show that. I mean, I don't quite get this. I mean, and I have great respect for Sean Malone. I actually work with him on other matters. So, I mean, but part of that analysis showed that the foundation of the house was part of the excavating for the foundation of the house should be part of the grade change analysis, which is just not the way things are done. I know building inspector's on, I saw that he was on at one point, but, I just feel like we keep, my client has invested a lot of money and time into this project. He's done everything that he's been asked to do by the town in terms of how he's been instructed to proceed, to the T in terms of, what he's been required to do. And, he's got a foundation that's been sitting there that he can't proceed with. And, I just don't get what another delay is going to do, other than, just continue to try to, frustrate the ability to build a project that, does meet the dimensional requirements of the town. So
I appreciate your advocacy and I appreciate your position, Mr. Vaughn. I do want to make sure that the board members, my fellow board members, have the opportunity to get all the information that they want in making this decision. So I appreciate your position. I will put it to them as to whether or not they feel there's additional information. Dorothy, I've heard your position. I don't know that Mr. Vaughn changed your point of view. Bob, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I agree with Attorney Vaughn that if this was an issue, why haven't we seen it? I think we're, grasping at some issues here that are we really just delaying this? I don't see that every subdivision plan has to go through site plan review. And I think that's been alluded to, right? I don't see that. I see it fits possibly into the very narrow section 9517, right? And that's really what we're down to.
I disagree, but that's whatever, we can discuss that later.
Okay.
You don't think 9.5, well, it doesn't matter.
So you don't think there would be any need for additional information, Bob, is what you're saying? You're not interested in hearing?
Well, I mean, I'll hear it, but I think we have to keep it on a short leash.
I would agree. I think any continuance would
with
be
that.
based on the submission of that and, and the opportunity of Mr. Vaughn to submit his information, that we would not go beyond that. I know that there are other, we will now have been at this for a solid 6 hours pretty soon. And I would like to, if I were to continue this, I would want to do it very quickly and try to get solely for that piece.
I would agree that the scope of what, if we do continue, the scope of the material, the new material produced should be restricted to the questions that we're asking, which is the grade. And sorry, the dog is trying to participate again. And honestly, that document, the homeowners, the Abbey Road Homeowners Association, if there's any information out there with regard to that, that would be helpful as well.
What is that, Dorothy? What are you referring to?
In the development agreement, they refer to these restrictive covenants.
Yeah.
And then I got a copy of the restrictive covenants. I read that. And then, of course, that now references yet another unrecorded document, which is some other agreements of the Abbey Road Homeowners Association. And of course, that one wasn't recorded, or at least not that I saw. So if anybody has a copy, and it was supposed to be recorded with the easements and restrictive covenants, and I'm not seeing that it was. It's called the Declaration of Covenants, Restrictions, and Reservations of Abbey Road Homeowners Association.
Yeah, Dorothy, I have that. I think it was recorded. I thought you wanted the one that I sent you today. I'll send you the homeowners one. That's not.
Oh, okay, perfect. Great. Thank you, Art.
Well, may I ask, Mr. Chairman, through you to Dorothy, what exactly are you trying to gather from? I have it as well. I mean, it's kind of a boilerplate document that just talks about each homeowner being responsible for the maintenance and inspection and upkeep of the detention systems that are on their property. And if not, the town has the right to come in and do the work and charge it back. And, so is there something specific that you're?
Nope. It's just that if it's in that development agreement, we're we're being challenged here that these houses are not in compliance with the development agreement. And I'm looking at documents and that are being referenced therein, and I have no idea what they say. And I just want to take a quick peek and make sure that what's being proposed is in compliance with those agreements. They may not be relevant to what's being proposed, but I don't know that without looking at them. That's all. Can you appreciate that?
Yeah, no, I just didn't know if there was something specific. It's I've scanned through it. I don't think anything that I can assure you there's nothing in here about modest home sizes, if that's what you were getting at before, but
I'm not getting at anything other than we're being asked a specific question with regard to the development agreement. And then that agreement references yet a couple of the other agreements. And I just want to make sure that we've crossed our Ts and dotted our Is. That's all.
Can I just add, Dorothy, I'm happy to send it to you, but the agreements that were referred to in the development agreement were subsequent agreements that would implement that development agreement. They're not going to change its terms. The development agreement was the governing document between the select board and Five Corners. And then the covenants were to be drafted, signed, recorded after that at the time of the land conveyance. So I'm happy to send it to you, but I think you'll find that they don't add anything to the development agreement on this issue.
Perfect. That's all I'm looking for.
Mr. Roloffs?
Yes, thank you. I might be able to simplify things here. We certainly aren't looking to delay things and just push things out. With respect to the covenants, we're not grounding any of our arguments on those, so we're not asking for more time to address any of those. Obviously, if you want to review them, that's your call. With respect to the question of grade changes and the starting point for that analysis, we hadn't, as Art correctly mentioned, submitted anything tying our grade change analysis to the approved grades as a starting point. And the reason we didn't do that is because I don't understand why you would do that. Those grades within the lot, as Ann Sarah mentioned, are grades associated with the build out of the lot. So the developer can't have it both ways. They can't say the details related to the build out of the lot that are shown on the plan are not binding on us, so we can build whatever complies with zoning on the one hand, and then on the other hand, argue that they get the benefit of the proposed grades that were shown on that lot since they're shown on the definitive plan. So they can't have it both ways. The grades that would normally be the starting point for the analysis in the context of a subdivision would be the grades associated with the build out of the road and the storm and maybe the stormwater infrastructure. Most towns don't include in their definitive process grade changes within the lot that are sufficient to support a hypothetical building. The proposed grades in most subdivision plans are the grades that are going to be established in order to build the roadway and to build the stormwater infrastructure. Most subdivision plans show those proposed grades. Those are the approved grades in a typical subdivision plan. Here, the grades are higher, right? There's more fill brought into the site because of the build out that's depicted there. So if you're not going to bind the developer to the build out and to the setbacks that are shown and the yard spaces that are shown, they can't take credit for the grading shown on the same plan that's tied directly to the building. So those grades that come into the building are not the starting point for the site plan review analysis.
I understand that position that you've made, Mr. Roloff. You made it a number of times, and I do understand your position. I think what our ask is notwithstanding your position, if we were to take the position that the subdivision plan and the grading changes within the subdivision plan were the approved grading changes and the grading changes that we would need to use to determine whether or not this house itself triggered separately and independently from the subdivision plan, site plan approval. That is the question that we are asking and trying to understand.
And I think we would just concede that point then, because if we lose if the zoning board decides to give the developer the credit of those proposed grades and allow them to treat them as existing grades, we'd just concede the argument. We lose the argument. We're not going. we're not asking you for the opportunity to take, to give us more time to then provide another submittal based upon that starting point, because we just think it's the wrong starting point.
Okay. So then we would not, you don't need to submit additional information. You would be, if we assume that's, okay,
That's correct.
then you would not, all right, so Art, I think that gets back to where we were, which is, and Dorothy and Bob, I think that gets back to where we were, which is to say that the site, if we were to accept the subdivision, then the site plan is not necessary for the house itself.
Okay, well, I appreciate that clarification and both councils' efforts to frame the issues as well as we can here.
Yes.
Miss Sarah, I see you have your hand raised. I'm assuming that that's just a leftover, but if you do, I'm
It's a leftover, I'm sorry.
all right, no worries. I just wanted to make sure that you had your opportunity to get your last say in. Is there anybody else out there? You know, I know we've got a number of other people. I would put that out to see if there's anybody else who has a comment or that has not already been expressed. Yes, Mr. Scarf.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just saw in Ann Sarah's presentation a comment about the basement water issues, and I just wanted to reinforce that. I don't think it's been discussed in the previous call. So as far as I know, most of the neighbors on Dana Avenue and even up on North Border Road have issues with basement water, and especially when we get saturated ground and then it get a storm, it's particularly troublesome, and people have had to rip out, finished carpets and whatnot in their basement because of this. But it goes all the way to the top of the hill. It's not just, I'm at the bottom, I'm at 2 Dana Avenue, but it goes all the way to the top. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Can I speak?
Yes, ma'am.
So there is a big water problem, in Winchester, especially in this area. My kids went to school and I know what the water problem is. And my husband is an engineer and a reliability engineer. So we have 2 sump pumps. And then we have, because he's a reliability engineer, we have a backup of a backup of a backup for the sump pumps. Luckily, we did not get water once he has all this instituted. But I know they have had damaged every time when it rains a lot, their basements get flooded. And I know that for a fact. So the reservoir is so close to us and the water table being so high, it's just because of the sump pumps and because my husband is a reliability engineer that we are saved. Otherwise, it would not be so. So there is a big water problem here.
Thank you.
30 years we've been living here in Winchester and we know about it.
I can appreciate that. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions at this point? Bob, Dorothy, any questions?
No.
And I do not see any other. Let me just scroll through quickly. I don't see that. We're down to 1 page, so we've lost people. All right. So I will entertain a motion to close discussion.
I'll make the motion to
all right.
close.
Dorothy, do you second? All in favor? Aye. All right. So moved. We will move to close discussion at this point.
Mr. Chairman, may I just ask you to take the roll call vote?
Oh, yes.
Just for the formality of it, and I take it by closing discussion, you are closing the public hearing on this.
Correct. We are closing the public hearing on this matter. We will move to deliberation. Mark Waterbury, aye.
Dorothy Simboli, aye.
Robert Tedesco, aye.
All right. Thank you. So we have, I think, several days worth of testimony now and lots of materials that we've all reviewed. I think there are a couple major questions which we have to figure out how to answer.
Mhm.
Specifically, I think the first and foremost is, the height or what grounds and grading we use as the trigger point. And so I would be, do we adopt the subdivision plans, or do we go with Mr. Roloff's more aggressive more plan, saying that the existing property prior to the subdivision and that the subdivision itself should have gone under site plan review, trying to understand the height. We've seen sorry, yes, Art?
I don't mean to interrupt again. I'm happy to wait my turn. I just want to make a comment
Nope.
if I may.
I appreciate your comments and guidance.
What I heard tonight from, I believe, the architect was that if this board believes that the house has only 4 major exterior corners rather than 6, that the bottom story becomes a basement.
Correct.
Which would create the stories violation apart from whatever happens on the top level. That would make it, right, that would make it 3.5 stories. So, and he said it would be a relatively easy adjustment, but if that's true, then it would require a revision of the plan. And I'm wondering if you want to start there and decide the 4 versus 6 issue. You've got Al Weil on as well, I see.
Yep.
But maybe that's an easier place to start, because if you decide one way, then you don't need to reach anything else tonight until you see the revised plans.
That's a valid point. I appreciate that, Art. I think that's a great position.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I
Thoughts?
agree.
Dorothy?
Yeah, I agree. We can hit that one first.
All right. I read the direction of the, sorry, where was I looking at? So I'm not aware of us ever having used a 6 point, 6 points to generate the height calculation. And all the other ones that I have seen us do, we've used the 4 points of the exterior corners of the house and the major corners of the house in calculating it. I know we had this over on Ginn, and we used the exterior 4 corners to generate our calculations. I would be, I appreciate their position, the developer's position that, they're using 6 corners because there's a jump out, or the house jots out slightly. Excuse me for 1 second. I apologize. Apologies, I had an alarm going off on my furnace. I do apology. I haven't had a chance to get it fixed yet, so it goes off every 12 hours. I'm inclined to adopt the 4. To my mind, I didn't see anything that would convince me that we should be using a different standard. We've always used, in the years that I've been on this board, the 4 corners of the exterior, which I think, they have, the developer, Mr. Harley, then admits that would put them, his own plans make that basement now a story and get us into a 3-story house using the full height of the basement being above the 50% threshold.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I agree as well.
So
do we discuss anything else, or that's?
That's, I think, Art, do we go further? I appreciate that Mr. Harley could then quickly indicated that he would be amenable to making plan changes that would correct that.
Well, while you're all convened and thinking about these issues, you're free to address any other issues you want. And if the fix on that is relatively straightforward or simple, then some of the other issues may not change much. So you might have to revisit them a little bit, but if you want to make more progress tonight, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah, let's try.
Okay. So I think that to my mind, again, we've reviewed dormers ad nauseum. I don't see that the structures that he's, the front dormers on the house constitute more than 50% of the roof line. And they are, and I also do not believe that the attic, looking at where I find it persuasive that the rafters and the roof joists are hitting the actual exterior wall, where they intersect the exterior walls are at the second floor. I appreciate that they've created additional usable space up there, but they've done it under, and even going down to the height calculations, I'm persuaded that it's under it's close. It's a very close call, but I am persuaded that it's under the 40-foot heights restrictions that we would need to. Dorothy, do you have
Yeah, well, no, I'm going into a definition of a story.
Okay.
Which is that it's not designed for or intended to be used for human occupancy. And it's very close.
Right. I mean, I think we've got the 3-story, but the question is it a half story, which is then permitted, or is it a full story, which would then, and I think it's,
You believe it's a half story?
I think it's a half story. I think the way in which they've cleverly designed it, but we were seeing a lot of the houses cleverly design their roof lines to they don't need the knee wall, and the roof line comes down to intersect the house at the second story. I mean, what we are now saying is the third story because we're finding the basement to be a story. But if you take out the basement, I think, I hear what you're saying. I think that but I think that so long as the house is under the 40-foot, the height of they've created and they didn't change the peaking of the roof, the pitch of the roof does not seem to be abnormal based on the designs that we've seen.
What about the fact that it's 14 feet?
It's
an unusual, it's
unusual, but it seems to be pitched appropriately based on the side elevations that we saw, the design, from my opinion, of the side elevations that we saw.
So here's my issue with that issue about the human occupancy. So the story definition is it's to be designed. So it's a story is it does not include the lowest portion so contained if more than 1/2 of such portion vertically is below the mean finished grade of the ground adjoining such building, or the uppermost portion so contained if under a sloping roof and not designed or intended to be used for human occupancy. So it's sort of like, so then that would say that a half story shouldn't be designed for human occupancy, even though it's not referenced in the definition of a half story. It's referenced in the definition of a story. Does that make sense? What do I do with a half? What do I do with something that's dimensionally complying with a half story, but is designed for human occupancy?
And I think we have this in a number of the buildings in town, and we see it as in a number of cases where that upper level, the attic level, is designed for human occupancy. And I think that so long as it constructs as a half story, that the town has historically permitted that, so that the house does not present into the expectation is the house to not present into the neighborhood as a 3-story house. Yes, Art, sorry.
No, I think I may be able to help Dorothy on this. So if it is designed for human occupancy, then it's not excluded, and therefore it's a story.
Yep.
The definition of half story incorporates the term story, which the story definition didn't. So now with a half story, you're starting with a story. You're starting with something that is designed for human occupancy, But then if it meets this, it's only a half story.
Got it.
That's where I was going. Art said it far more eloquently than I did.
And my brain was just whatever. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. That helped me a lot.
Mr. Chairman, may I just, I want to revisit the procedural point I made before, which is that you're going to
Yes.
get a revised plan. That revised they've got a building permit on certain plans. They can't just revise the plan and continue with you, in my view, and council can address this if they like. They have to resubmit revised plan to Al, I believe. Al gets to look at this again.
Right.
And then it comes to you. We can figure out whether you can retain jurisdiction to simplify that subsequent appeal to you. But I didn't mean to suggest that they can just put in this appeal a plan that differs from the plan
Right.
they got the building permit.
Right. No, I was not interpreting, let me speak English. I was not interpreting what you were saying to mean that we could just accept a different plan right here, that they would,
Okay.
we would be rejecting, we would be, if we're, it sounds like we are going to uphold, fine for the petitioner. I'm not going to say, but we seem to be finding that there's a third story, so it would have to go back. They would have to submit a revised plan to the building department, and then that plan could then be appealed to us.
I just think, given the fact that we've gone through a lot of information here and we have a lot of facts in front of
Yep.
us, it may be helpful to the parties for us to
I
try to do
agree.
the analysis so that
Yep.
it
I agree, Dorothy. I think that if we can simplify the subsequent appeal that I think we're going to see, it will make it easier for all of us.
I don't feel like spending another 6 hours
No.
rehashing this all again.
Exactly.
No offense, anyone.
We had a number of issues. I think if we can evaluate and determine many of them now, then
Yeah.
it makes it clear where we have, what needs to be corrected, and if a future plan were to come back.
Yeah, I
Because-
think it's fair to the parties for
Yep,
us
I agree.
to go through and do that.
So I think we've handled the dormers, the half store. I mean, again, I think that if the basement were not to be considered a story, and you would have a 2.5 story house, which would be permitted. I think it's currently designed, that upper level meets the definition of a 2.5 story. The rafters bisect the exterior wall, two of the exterior walls at, less than 3 feet.
Okay. And site plan review?
Site plan review, yes. So I am inclined, I give Beth Rudolph wide deference, and I think that when she reviewed the subdivision plan, that the grading on the property was intimate to the overall design of the subdivision, such that it would have the appropriate drainage to support building on the lot. I think that's why they did it that way. I think that I appreciate what Mr. Roloff said, is that the location of the house may change it slightly, but I think that overall, right or wrong, I think that at the end of the day, the subdivision was designed in a way, and that when Beth lays that out, and the reason why they lay that out is so that Beth can do her drainage calculations and ensure that the runoff from the road and the changes to the topography made by the road would be appropriately captured, both by the infiltration systems proposed in the lots, as well as the swale at the bottom of the hill.
But that only addresses the infiltration issues and the engineering. It doesn't address the issue that, and I don't think it's Beth Rudolph's purview to determine, and this may be beyond the scope of what we should be talking about, but I do think that subdivision plan was supposed to have gone through site plan review. And I don't think that's Beth Rudolph's call, and I don't think it's Brian Zakelli's call. And a lawyer, if the developer hired a lawyer, the lawyer should have looked at it and looked at 9.5.2 and said, looks like the subdivision plan needs to go to the ZBA.
But I think the only thing we would have been considering at the ZBA is exactly what we just laid out, is,
Well, no, because it's site plan review, meaning it doesn't say it can't be built. It says that it's gonna go through a lot of the different hoops to, look at the size and scale of the buildings, the massing, all the things that are being thrown at us right now. It seems like this project should have collectively gone through that. It's not saying it shouldn't be built. It's just saying there are protective mechanisms in site plan review. There's a reason why town meeting passed it in 2016 was to avoid clear cutting of lots. It was to avoid having landscaping and proper landscaping plans ignored.
Mhm.
It was like another set of checks and balances. And that just completely got ignored here. And I'm having a really, really difficult time getting beyond that.
yeah, I mean, I had the same concerns. I did look at what, again, I've had I read Mr. Brian's email and I said, but that's not your purview, Brian. It's great that you think this. He says, in my opinion, I'm like, but that's your opinion.
Right. But he's not a lawyer and he's not, and.
But I'm just going back to,
Any lawyer would know you can't rely on his opinion. I mean, it's not Brian's opinion to.
but, and so I want to ask, I want to, not to put Art on the spot, but I think you sort of, where I'm hinging on, and this is where, what Art said, and I will ask you to sort of keep us honest, Art, because I don't want to put words in your mouth while I have you on the phone. Is sort of, site plan review for the subdivision. Dorothy's, correct. There's a number of other aspects to site plan review that we have to look at, but you seem to indicate that for the subdivision, we would only be looking at stormwater and drainage, which is that's the rub I'm having. If we're looking at stormwater, the only thing we would have been looking at in site plan review at the subdivision, was stormwater and drainage, then we're looking at that now. And would we question what I give us, and in most of these cases, we give wide deference. The board has historically given wide deference to Beth Rudolph and her team in the establishment of the appropriate, necessary tools for drainage. And so would we be permitted to look at are we permitted, I guess, to say, if we were to look at subdivision, do we go beyond drainage and stormwater? Is that appropriate? I think that's where I would like to get your guidance.
As I said earlier, if the site plan review is predicated on the changes of percentage and square footage in the subdivision process, then I don't think your site plan review would be looking at the houses, because that's just sort of mixing and matching. It's taking one trigger of site plan review, which is not related to building construction, unlike the other 6 subsections, and then applying it to buildings, because that's typically where we are in the process on the ground. So I don't believe you'd be looking at the housing. I appreciate Dorothy's concern with the massing and the other issues that you've heard tonight. I don't believe that would be the focus of site plan approval if you were to conduct it. Because that answer hinges on what Jeff Roloff's conceded, or ultimately agreed with, that if you're starting from the subdivision approved grades, then there is no further trigger of site plan review.
Right.
In connection with the house construction.
Can you repeat what you just said, Art, again about the?
Yeah. As the conversation that several of us had, I think Jeff, after the discussion about more time, where Jeff landed, and of course, if I misconstrued it, he can speak up. He'd be permitted to speak. That if you start from the grades approved in the subdivision, that there is no further grading sufficient to trigger site plan approval under 9517.
Right.
That the grading that the appellant is complaining about in this appeal is the grading that was approved in the subdivision plan, not subsequent grading. So if that's what it is, then there's no houses.
But that's not existing grading. That's the fictitious grading that was approved, right?
Well,
But
we know in the subdivision,
bylaw doesn't speak to, the zoning bylaw doesn't speak to that change in grading. It's talking about what happens when you build this house. And what's
well, the site plan approval section is speaking about the grade and not the house construction. That's
Right.
exactly the point. The other 6 sections talk about construction of a building. This one, we're talking about the 6% 500 square feet regrading that was done as part of building this subdivision road and laying out the lots and getting subdivision approval. So this one, this trigger for site plan review does not, in my view, my advice is that it does not involve the house construction.
Right.
And I mean, I agree with Dorothy. I think that the subdivision plan should have come to the ZBA for approval. But the time to appeal that was during the subdivision process, not now during the construction process. Because I think that if the subdivision plan had been built out and then you had grassed lots with trees on it right now, in accordance with the subdivision plan, the building of it would be based off of what those contours were based off the subdivision plan. And I think that's where we get to, that we could go back and review the subdivision plan for site plan review, but it's a question of, did Beth Rudolph do her calculations right to calculate for runoff in designing the subdivision plan? I don't know that I don't have the expertise to do that. And I don't even know that we would question it either. I think that she's designed that, she built that to the specifications that she
Right.
felt necessary to, and I get it. But I think that, I was in the same boat that you were until Art made his position that, gave his recommendation to us, that if we accept his recommendation, then our subdivision, the site plan review that we would have would be limited to stormwater and drainage.
So what you're saying is they could go out right now without any building permit in hand and go and build out each one of these lots per that subdivision plan without it coming in front of us because no one appealed it at the time.
Correct.
And so we should presume that we are looking at lots that are already built out and established as on that subdivision plan.
Yes, correct.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes, Art.
The sort of predicate issue to what I said is whether site plan approval is required in this situation at all. And 2 of you have expressed the view on that, and I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with that. It's a difficult issue because the bylaw does not have an explicit exception for subdivision plans. But there's a real question, in my view, whether the planning board in sponsoring that or town meeting and voting for that bylaw amendment meant to duplicate the subdivision review process.
I'm not going to second guess their whether, no offense to whoever drafted it, but if it wasn't drafted properly, I've read the bylaws cover to cover, and I would interpret it that if they wanted it to carve out, they should have carved it out. They didn't carve it out, and therefore it would be subject to our review. I don't disagree with your reading, Art, but I would read it to say the town had the opportunity in drafting their bylaws to carve it out. They chose not to. The town can tell me I'm wrong. At the end of all this, they could tell me, you're wrong. You don't have the authority to conduct site plan review for subdivisions. They can change their bylaws to tell me that I'm wrong. I
just wanted to illuminate. I wanted to illuminate that issue and not have you think that my view is necessarily that site plan review is appropriate in the first place. I was So I was talking about only the next question about what would the scope of that be?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, Art. I do appreciate that. I think, from my standpoint, I think subdivision review the subdivision would have been subject to site plan review, and it should have been subject to site plan review, and they should have done it at that time. Unfortunately, it's aged past when we could go back and look at the subdivision plan, and no one appealed it at the time. And I appreciate that there's a number of reasons why it wasn't appealed, but I'm in the position of saying I have to accept that.
Is there a process to appeal a subdivision plan? Because obviously that doesn't come before us.
There is certainly under chapter 41, but I'm not sure an appeal of the subdivision plan would have been warranted. I think the way it would have played out under your view, the applicant, that is, site plan review is triggered when the grading is done, which suggests that in a subdivision context, you go get your subdivision approval. Then before you can actually implement that regrading and build your road, you have to go get site plan approval of that plan as well. So it's not a matter of appealing the subdivision approval. It would be a matter of somebody, if the grading started without site plan approval, a neighbor or somebody coming in and saying, hey, you can't, that's a zoning violation.
What triggers that? Do they go, so when they get their site plan, they get their subdivision approval, and then they start doing do they go get a building permit so that they can do the grading?
I don't think any building permit is required for that. Al can confirm that, but there's no structure being built. Although you do have the drainage structures, your catch basins and things. I would leave it to Al to determine whether that requires a building permit. But I don't think.
I would think it would. I mean, we've had other matters where people have just moved soil around, and that triggers a building permit to go do that, right?
Well, just moving soil, I'm not sure why that would trigger a building permit.
Moving soil more than 6% over 500 square feet.
Well, that triggers site plan approval. It doesn't, but I'm not sure why that would trigger a building permit.
Got it. Okay.
So if there's a building permit, then I suppose someone could keep track of that, and if one issued, appeal that on the grounds that the developer needed to go get site plan approval before the actual grading started. If there's no building permit and you just see the bulldozers out there one day, I suppose somebody can have a request for zoning enforcement to Al, and then the usual process of appealing that to this board if he denies enforcement. I think that's the way it plays out, but none of those scenarios is an appeal of the subdivision approval because there was nothing wrong with that.
Right. So they haven't moved the soil around yet. Now they're moving the soil around. So
but the question is limited only to drainage based on the subdivision plan.
No, we'll talk about the grade change. I'm talking about
yes, but the grade change is limited to, again, we go back to they're moving the soil around. So then again, going back to the point, they could go in there, move the soil around right now to get into compliance with the subdivision plan.
Right, but what I'm saying is because there's no appeal process for the subdivision plan, right? Art just said, nothing is triggered until they start moving the soil around.
Right.
So they haven't moved the soil around until now. Which has now triggered them saying, oh, well, is this correct? So I'm not even looking at whether or not the subdivision plan required site plan approval. I'm looking at just literally moving the soil around. Is the physical act of moving the soil around triggering site plan review at this point? And I don't care that it was previously approved under a subdivision plan. If the physical act of moving the soil over 6%,
over 6%,
over 6%, over more than
it's
500 square feet is the triggering thing, well, then it triggers site plan approval, which is why it's in front of us, I think.
Yeah.
But they haven't proven, have they proven that more than 6% if it has been moved?
If you look at OAKs, if you look at it's clear based on this, if you just look at the grading, that there was the topological grading, or at least I find it very clear that the OCG's report that there's a change in elevation greater than 6% over way more than 500 square feet.
Yeah. And again, that's not saying that they can't build. It's just saying that they now need to jump through the hoops that the town intended them to jump through when they passed the site plan review, site plan review process in 2016.
Yeah.
They
But
did
it gets
not want huge houses looming over other things. They didn't want huge retaining walls and those kinds of grade changes.
But I don't know that, but where does that get us? Like at the end of the day, I mean, I agree with you, Dorothy. I just don't know that it gets us. I mean,
well, where it gets us is, okay, so the subdivision plan was approved for them to put these houses here, and there's a certain amount of grade changes that need to take place. And this is, I'm just thinking hypothetically here, right? And they're in front of us and they're doing site plan approval or review. So now we're going, okay, well, how can we protect the neighbors? How can we make this seem a little more, reasonable? Okay, well, let's do some landscaping. Where's your landscape plan? What kind of buffering can we do? Can you, downscale it slightly this way? Can, like that's the whole point of site plan review.
I don't know that we get into site plan, right? That's the question. It comes back, it's the chicken or the egg argument, right? And that's where I'm still struggling is I am with you that this triggers site plan review. I just don't know at what point it triggered site plan review.
I think, and I just asked Art that question.
And I agree. So the moving of the dirt, so he's got the approvals for the uphill ones. So he gets him a site plan review for this one. We can arguably now that the house is, because he's doing it while he's building the house. So now for the other ones, he just does it before he does the house. And then we're looking at only no house construction, just doing grading of the land to get into conformity with doing two steps instead of one. And I don't know, right? Like that's the piece that I'm at, right? He can go do the grading on all the other 6 lots, get them all graded. It'll trigger site plan review because he's moving dirt, but we're not looking at anything other than the stormwater and drainage for all of those other lots. And in this one, because he did it out of order, we could arguably try to, impose some level of restrictions around landscaping. I mean, again, I think, the biggest thing that I've heard, and I know is taken out of order, conservation has a play here and they've chosen not to. Conservation had orders, we've got that, the letter from them where they had specific, trees that they had ordered to be retained as part of their conservation plan that, and the land was clear cut, that they think that that's in violation of their order, but that hasn't been taken up at this point, and I don't plan to do conservation's work. So I got enough on my plate to take out their work. So like that's, but I do think, I think we've seen some level of a landscape plan, and I think that, whether or not a tree can go where they say it can because of I think they're questionable, but if they're committing to planting large scale trees we're in the same place. Like, Art, you seem to have wanted to say something, so I don't want to give you.
No,
relying on your guidance heavily here, so.
Well, I what I'm wrestling with is how many site plan review processes are there? When the whole project went through subdivision, but that's not when the grading was being done. I suppose the developer at the time, 5 Points, could have gone through site plan review for the whole project, all 5 lots and the road, even though he wasn't starting, they weren't starting actual grading yet. Now you've got different people owning different lots. So since one buyer bought lots 1 through 3, when he starts to implement the subdivision plan on one of those lots, because he's building one house at a time, does that mean you do lots 1 through 3? Does that mean, and then you do a separate one when lot 4 goes to build that house, and then another one for lot 5? You can't do site plan review across different owners.
Yep.
So to me, this is one of the boxes you get into when you apply site plan review to the subdivision process.
Right.
Because the lots get sold off to different people, and then, and the site plan provision doesn't say on a lot. It just says if you do X square feet over, Y%, you need site plan approval. So defining, how many and what lot you're focusing on is not easy. And I think that's.
Well, but I think that goes into exactly it, Art. Like the other owners, if they wanted to raise the land up to conform with the subdivision plan, which they have to do, then they're going to trigger site plan review on their lots. That they didn't get the developer to do it in advance for the totality of the property. I think that's what we'd end up being. So 1 through 3 could arguably grade all of his property into conformity with the subdivision plan as he's required to do. And that triggers a site plan review.
So since you have only lot 1 in front of you,
Yep.
you would be saying lot 1 has to go get site plan approval for that piece of the subdivision because it was never obtained.
Mhm.
And then separately for lot 2, when that one comes up and when the grading starts, and separately for lot 3.
Well, but he could conceivably grade 2 and 3 since he owns them both simultaneously.
Yeah, good.
And we'd just be looking at them both simultaneously, but that's the other way to do it. Just as if the original, 5 points had graded the whole property the way he was supposed to, and we would have looked at it then. The question is what we would have looked at, right? We're not, and I think that's the part that I get to is the subdivision plan is there. They have to grade it to that or they're in violation of the subdivision plan. They start to grade it. If you grade it before you build grade it, get that approved, and then you build your house, you're building it on that grade, but at least the subdivision plan has been there. I don't know what to do. But I get at some level I say, I know what the intent of the subdivision, as we saw from Ms. Sarah's presentation, the concept of we don't want houses looming over each other. And so, but unfortunately we're in that conundrum of if he graded the whole subdivision, which he didn't do, so maybe that's the get out of jail free card, wasn't graded, so we have to look at it on a case by case basis, and you're building your house, so but then nothing gets built there because we won't get past massing and looming over the neighbor's house when you start lifting the house up 4 or 5 feet.
Well, that's not true.
Okay.
No, because site plan, going back to site plan review, the purpose of it is not to prevent somebody from building. The purpose of it is to create a system of checks and balances to, soften the blow, I guess, from the big house going in next door or the whatever, not necessarily big, but you know what I'm saying, like.
Oh, I know, but yeah, I mean, I think, but we've also
Checks and
seen.
balance system. You've got woods next door to you. Now all of a sudden it's getting clear cut and somebody's putting up a huge house. It's the town stepped in and said, okay, we need a process to soften that a little. It's
Well, I
not
know
saying the developer can't put the house there.
No, well, but I think we've seen it time and time again where there's, and I'm not saying a 4 foot retaining wall equates to a 10-foot retaining wall because it doesn't. But we've turned down,
But we can put in landscaping to make the appearance of that retaining wall be less out of character. For a suburban neighborhood, or whatever you want to say. There's lots of different things. I mean, that's where site plan review comes into play. I think it's to protect the neighbors in this exact scenario. That was what it was intended for. I mean, in my opinion.
No, I appreciate that. I just don't know that, again, I'm stuck with the same point of if we find site plan, what do we look at? Do we look at the house because they're building the house and moving the dirt? Or do we just look at the moving of the dirt?
We look at what the bylaw tells us to look at, which is
but they're moving the dirt based on the subdivision, right? Like, I'm sure if we told Mr. Meinl, you can't do the moving of the dirt, then he would want to build the house at the grade that is currently at, and it would just be the same house as of right in the same spot without moving the dirt. The dirt is only having to be moved as a result of the subdivision plan.
Mark, the bylaw doesn't say he can't move the dirt. It just says it triggers site plan review. And then he would have to come before the board, and he would have to have it says no certificate of zoning compliance shall be issued for any such building or buildings unless the same conforms in all respects to such site plan and unless all facilities, including in the site plan, have been installed in accordance therein. So he'd have to do his site plan. He'd have to show his building, what it looks like when he goes to move the dirt. Because you can't just go, you're not just going to move the dirt, right? Why are you moving the dirt? That would be
I don't think that's subject to site plan. Site plan review is not why you're moving the dirt. If he's making grade changes, right? Again, makes the grade changes now, tears down his foundation, makes the grade changes now, and says, here you go, I've made my grade changes across all 3 of my lots. What are we looking at? Were the grade changes made in conformity with the subdivision? Do they meet stormwater and drainage calculations? Then he comes back and he drops the same exact house that he has now on there. We're not, there's no landscaping plan necessary for moving dirt. He could plant all grass there. I think that's what, like that,
the 9.5.7 discusses the proposed land use. I do think it triggers site plan review. He goes in, and I do think it prompts the question, what is the proposed land use? And for him to come in front of us and say, oh, I plan on just changing the grade and planting all grass here would obviously be.
Yeah, if I may, I'm wondering if though
he decides to put up a house.
I'm wondering though if the site plan review, the whole bylaw, was more intended when subdivision approval and review doesn't happen. Wasn't it more intended for tear downs, and because those just would normally just pull a permit, right? So you'd have a small house and then the large house gets built.
No, because
if I may, I haven't really said anything. So may I speak?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, we have the subdivision process, okay? And I'm just not seeing your argument. I don't see where it really fits into, the very defined applicability 1 through 7, possibly 7 because of moving some dirt around, I understand. But I view subdivision control laws for subdivisions, and they cover a lot of what we're talking about, right? They cover the construction, the grade, water management, etc. I view this site plan review as, again, small house in a neighborhood gets torn down, something crazy gets built. Who stops it? It's always had to fall on the feet of the building inspector, and who just consults with zoning. So in response to that, this section was drafted to try to manage those situations that can't be managed by the planning board or other boards. And I just don't see how this fits. I don't. That's just my opinion. I don't.
So Bob, have you taken a look at 9.5.2?
You're breaking up. I'm sorry.
If you
9.5.2, Bob.
You go to 9.5.2.
Yeah.
The bylaw goes on to say when it is required. So if we go with 7 that it's required, then we go to 9.5.2. When it's required, it alludes to the fact no building permit shall be issued, no area for roadways, parking, loading, open space shall be established or changed. So it references roadways. So if it's a single house lot with a tear down, then why would we be installing roadways? it obviously contemplated anything from a single lot to a much larger scale development.
But I think that, well, okay, I feel that you have to have the meet one of the first 7 tests. And I'm
Right.
not convinced, and I'm still not convinced that 7 has been violated. That's all I'm saying. I don't know that.
Despite what Mark, I thought you said that they showed a grade change that was different of more than 6%.
Then if that's the case, then why are we debating it then? Then it's cut and dry. So make a motion. Right?
Well, a motion might be premature since you're going to look at the further process that we talked about before. Maybe, Mr. Chair, I didn't think you were going to get this far into deliberations this evening. If you want a memo from me on this issue, because it really is a legal issue, whether the bylaw applies in the to a project that's gone through subdivision control. If I mean, since you're going to be coming back to this issue, I would offer to provide that memo.
That would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
Mark?
Well, I mean, it gets us, we're gonna be back here either way.
I mean, so you're going to give us a legal memo, you're going to refer to sort of other towns that have had similar cases, or what do you, I mean, how are you going to give us guidance on whether or not?
I'm gonna do my lawyer magic and look at all sorts of different things. I don't know that other towns, I've never heard of this issue coming up. I've never heard of site plan approval to a subdivision, applied to a subdivision, to a whole subdivision. But I will canvass other towns insofar as we know them in my office, and we'll do whatever other research we can do and think about how the bylaw most makes sense.
Have you seen bylaws that are worded similarly to this one?
I have not. Site plan approval, I haven't seen one that's focused only on grading, independent of construction. As Ann Sarah noted, it was added in 2016, which was before we became town council. But and there was that picture of that big house that was on the pedestal next to the small house. I haven't seen, I think that's, well, regardless of what you think the bylaw meant, I have not seen site plan approval required for something other than construction.
Right.
But I've never seen this presented here before. I mean, I don't.
Right,
All right.
none of us have seen it.
Well,
that would mean that someone could just regrade their lawn without ever needing to get approval.
I don't know. I don't agree with that at all. No, absolutely not. If someone did that and they graded more than 6% of 500 square feet, they would absolutely be in violation of that, and they would be subject to having to put all that back or come before the board. We've had one of those not too long ago.
But I don't understand why it wouldn't apply to a subdivision. The town can tell.
I can tell, because the reason why is because that's done during the subdivision process.
But it wasn't.
All that's taken into consideration. That's why all the drainage plans are done. That's why it's done. How can you calculate drainage? How can you calculate runoff if you don't have those other factors in place?
But Bob said the purpose of site plan approval in Winchester per that town meeting didn't have to do with drainage. I mean, yes, drainage obviously was one piece of it.
No. You're missing. No, I'm saying that's what happens at the subdivision level. That all takes, so that's why it doesn't go back through site plan. You don't get all approved for your subdivision and then have to come to this board for site plan review unless it's triggered by one of those 7 characteristics in 951. That's the parameter, and we're hung up on the grading, and that's fine. And you say you have evidence that the allegation is that something has really been dramatically changed beyond the 500 square feet, that 6% grade. And perhaps it has. I just haven't seen it. I'll continue. We're deliberating, and
yeah, I mean, I think I would take a look at the OCG memo.
Yeah,
lays that out. And I think if you can look at just a regular. I'm not a mathematician and I'm not an engineer, so my
So
rough
are you saying
calculations were that,
that, so are you saying that the building inspector did miss that?
no, I think the building inspector relying on the town planner, which
Yeah.
is said, the town planner says in his opinion, site plan approval wasn't required because they
Right.
discussed this because it was all discussed during the subdivision process.
Right.
And I would
Right.
say that at the subdivision process, in their subdivision plan, they were changing the grade of that property more than 6% over more than 500 feet. And so therefore, it should have triggered site plan approval. The subdivision process should have triggered site plan approval. It should have come here for us. It falls within the requirements of 9.5.1 sub 7, and therefore it should have come to us. And at that was, and what I'm saying, but what I'm saying to you, Bob, and what I was saying is, I don't know what we would have looked at, right? At the same
Right.
time, it would have come here. It's an
A&R now. It's like an A&R, you know, it's an A&R plan. Like, yeah, okay, yeah.
It should have come to us. It should have been approved by us, but I don't know that we would have. I don't know that if I was sitting on the board at that time, I don't know that we would have questioned it, because if Beth Rudolph is saying this is what's needed for drainage and stormwater runoff management.
Right.
See, and I disagree with you on that, because I think we would be forced per the bylaw to ask what the proposed use is, and then we'd be asking for what are those houses going to look like, and what are your landscaping plans, and they would have to do something more than a subdivision plan in this case with the grade change in order to have the individual lots approved by us. I think it's two pronged. I don't think they would have failed subdivision plan. I think they would have come to us, and then we would have flushed out the further issues about what these houses were going to look like and what the landscaping was going to look like outside of drainage. Because obviously that's Rudolph's purview within the subdivision plan.
Well,
I mean, I think I get what you're saying, Dorothy.
Because otherwise there's like a loophole, right? Otherwise it says, okay, you individual lot owner that's got a whatever, 1,000 square foot house on it. If you want to tear that down and change your grade and put in 5,000 square feet or 4,900 square feet, no, I'm sorry, 5,000 square feet, you've got to come in, or 49,000 if you're going to change your grade, 4,900, sorry, you're going to change your grade. You've got to come through site plan approval. But larger developer who buys 5 acres of land, you don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want. You can change the grade. You can put up whatever you want. You can, so all those surrounding neighborhoods around those 5 acres, those neighbors are not protected from this at all.
no,
I don't think it's fair. I don't think that's what the town intended.
And I think that within the subdivision, and to Bob's point, I think that we would have had to look at this from that limited perspective. We're going to grade this for this. We're going to grade it to subdivide it. And then when you come in to build, that's when the building permit gets issued. And so long as it's done by right, we'd be in that process of the Al could issue the building permit as of right, and it wouldn't come back to us. That we would have.
I'm looking at the language of 9.5.7 and I disagree.
I'm looking at it too, and I get it. I think,
What do you think they mean by the proposed land use then? They want us to ask the question. They want us to ask that. As soon as site plan review is triggered, they want us to ask, what's the proposed land use? What's the design of the building? What is the grading? What is the egress points?
I think when you look
but
at
aren't all those,
allowed
I
to
think the planning board, all those things are reviewed by the planning board, aren't they? Don't they have subdivision control laws that they work under? I mean, it's not the wild, wild west, as you know.
Yeah.
You indicated they could come in and do whatever they wanted. That's not the case at all.
No.
And they're
Well, no,
heavily
I mean-
reviewed by agencies in the town. I mean, you have the engineer, you have the planning director, you have you know, there's,
So,
general
I-
law-
But they didn't look at the lots. They didn't look at the houses. That's what I'm saying.
but I think,
Bob, is
but
they didn't
so,
look at them.
so can I just, in the interest of time, I think there, there was clearly a grade change of, I believe, to my opinion, having read everything, I think there was a grade change of greater than 6% over 500 feet. I think we can agree that, and Bob, I will, I want to hear what you have to say, but I think if we agree that there was a grade change of 6% over 500 feet, that will trigger site plan review, and therefore we have to send it back to them. It's going back because it's 3 stories. It'll go back because of site plan. And then when it comes back, and it has to come back for the building, and it has got to come back for site plan, then Art can, at that point, I think Art has said he was going to give us a memo for that future meeting that we will be having on this.
I was actually suggesting I was going to give you a memo before you decided whether they need
okay.
site plan review.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so, in the essence of time that it's 10 o'clock, do we want to continue deliberation?
Well, there's 3 more issues, is the development agreement. Well, subdivision approval, we've kind of been discussing already, and the order of conditions. Do you want to just crunch through those really quickly? 'Cause
Yeah.
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
they're fast.
What? Yeah, they're fast. I mean, again, I don't believe that it violated the development agreement. I don't think that. I appreciate that.
Not with the information that's been presented.
Yeah, based on the information that we have, I feel like there was what was laid out there does not end up violating that. Similarly, I don't find that it violates, they did everything that they were required to do under the subdivision agreement, which is they came to us for a variance, we said no, and now they're allowed to build by right in that parcel.
Right.
I think that what the outlines of the building that were there were for purposes of figuring out what the contours of the property would need to be, what the stormwater would need to look like, and how you were going to handle that.
What about the tree removal?
So are you talking the concert? I mean, again, I think that was Conservation Commission's.
Right.
I find it, I find it disingenuous for I think the developer at one point said that they didn't know that this was, that these trees were being protected. I'm not inclined to, I don't think that's accurate. I think that everyone who was a part of this knew that there was some desire to create and maintain the barrier between them. And I think part of the cut down and the clear cutting of that property was because if you left some of those trees, it would have by nature precluded the size of the houses. That some of those trees.
That's not
our purview. Beyond opining, I have nothing to say on it, and I would say that that's Conservation Commission. If they want to issue an order, they can issue their own order of conditions or find them in violation of their order of conditions.
Right.
But someone's got to go to conservation to do that. Like, it's
Yeah,
not,
I just think it's outside of our.
Yep.
I really do.
so,
That is definitely
remedied through.
And there's nothing in the subdivision plan. Sorry, my internet.
I didn't see anything in
cut
the,
out. I agree with you on the Conservation Commission, but going back to the subdivision approval, was there anything at all in the subdivision approval to suggest that they needed to leave those trees there?
it was in, it was the only place that I saw it was in the order of conditions from conservation.
Well, I think council described, they're talking about sheet C1 and sheet C5, the
Yeah.
landscaping plan versus the drainage plan. And one of them, C5, I think it was, one of those 2 plans had trees, notation about trees to be protected. You remember the colored dots on one of those plans as well. So that's where it came up. That's where it came up in the subdivision process.
Okay, so then that was.
Those were the trees to be protected by
Is that what we're-
conservation. Like, part of the issue of the
So
conservation
are those
approval.
Same trees. Are those the same trees that were already identified by conservation to be protected?
That's what conservation seems to be alleging that in their note to us.
Okay.
So just to frame the argument, the applicant is saying the landscaping plan, which I think was C1, did not require those trees to be protected. The appellant is saying that the other plan nevertheless shows that the trees were to be protected and it was part of the same set of plans. I think that's the issue. But I think that's really up to the planning board as well to decide whether, I mean, they didn't have any explicit condition in their decision about the trees. So I think it's for them to decide whether they think that their approval was violated.
Yeah. I mean, they
Okay, so two other boards are responsible to be addressing the removal of the trees.
Yep.
One is the planning board regarding 5, and one is the Conservation Commission based on is that correct?
Yep.
Right. Excuse me.
Okay.
So I think we're really down to, I mean, we've agreed that it's we agree that it's a 3-story building based on the
3.5, right?
3.5-story building. Yes, a 3.5-story building. So I think then we need to continue this deliberation for submission by Art of the memo detailing whether or not the detailing site plan review, the applicability of site plan review to a subdivision.
May I just address the process?
Certainly.
I'd actually like to hear from Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Roloffs. You know, when a court could retain jurisdiction if they send a matter back to be looked at more below. You know, this board is not in that kind of position. So if they're going to be new plans to Al, and you know, and then potentially a new appeal by one side or the other to you, you know, I can give you the memo anytime, but the question is whether you are simply overturning the building permit on the basis of the stories violation that you've discussed, and then you'll start over next time with whatever comes back to you. But you might want to hear from both counsel on whether they think that's the right way to do this.
Mr. Vaughn, Mr. Roloffs.
Well, I want to make sure I'm understanding your inquiry, Art. Are you saying that if at the end of the day, the interpretation here, and by the way, I don't want to interject, but just on the 4 versus 6, but I know you do have the building inspector that's here to comment on that should you wish to get input on it. But if the board decides it's that helpful. So, but is the question out that you're raising whether if at the end of the day the board feels like you have to use 4 corners?
Well, no, we're past that. So the board decided
Yeah.
you need to use 4 corners,
Right.
and your architect, I think, said that if you use 4 corners, then the basement counts as a story, which is why the board was just talking about 3.5 stories. So he said there's an easy fix. That's fine. We then discussed that fix has to go back to the building inspector, so that any building permit reflects the actual revised plans. And the question is, should this board try to hold these proceedings open in some fashion, or just close this out by overturning the building permit on that one basis? And then, because the rest of the discussion has been just for the party's benefit in structuring things going forward. So should the board hold this open or close it out? I don't see a well-established way to hold it open in any way, but I'm trying to do it the most efficient way for the board and for everybody.
Do you want us to rule on site plan and the building and stories, or are we good to just decide that it's 3.5 stories and we'll kick the site plan review down the road?
Are you asking me?
That's what we're asking, right, Art?
Well, no, if you want to decide on site plan approval, then they will know what they have to do. They have to revise the plan regarding the basement, and they have to come back for site plan approval, or I suppose appeal your decision if that's right, but I'd have to think about that. If you decide to hold off on the site plan decision until you get my memo and think about this further, then all you would be doing tonight is overturning the building permit on the basis of the story because of the basement issue that we talked about. And then waiting for it to come back to you in some fashion, whether it comes back with site plan approval. I mean, whether they come to you with site plan approval or not, it would be up to them. I know you're trying to give them as much guidance as possible.
Yep.
The other possibility, of course, is that the parties, based on all the swirling issues here tonight and the different views expressed by board members, that the parties would get back together and hammer something out.
So it sounds like you're going to be continuing the meeting relative to the site plan discussion. Is that correct? Because you need to get a memo, Art, to the board?
Well, I offered one and I think the board said they would like that. That's the question, is whether to continue this meeting or whether to just send it back for the revised plans on the stories issue.
If I might just interject. So I guess my thoughts on this are, this site plan issue is a core part of the appeal. It seems to me, given that you're sort of wrestling it down right now, that it's worth getting a determination from you on that issue. And folding that into a final decision on this appeal rather than just sending it back and then waiting for another appeal to deal with that issue. I don't know if it doesn't seem very efficient. I think it's gonna be expensive and probably just take more time. But to some extent, I defer to Mark on this. I mean, it also, I don't ever want to set up an unnecessary appeal to reserve your rights situation. So I don't know. That's a tough call.
I mean, if there procedurally or logistically is a way for us to wait for Art's memo on the site plan review applicability, and
Sure.
then we make our decision and then write the decision, taking all of the issues into account so that the parties know how to proceed moving forward the next time.
Yeah. That makes sense. If you can give me 2 weeks to submit that memo and have another meeting after that, so you'll continue this, you'll continue your deliberations.
Yep.
To 3 weeks out or whatever the next convenient date for you is, and then write a decision on everything. That's fine.
I see Mr. Meinhold. I will.
I was just going to say, it would just be nice to know what the end zone is that we got to kick the ball through here. So I think I would agree. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess as I'm understanding it, we don't want to have, it sounds like the board is of the opinion that the four corners are what needed to be addressed, and therefore, we have this issue about basement versus cellar. So it's easily addressable by us. I mean, we can address it and, make that compliant, but, we don't want to go down that road and then find out that the board feels like site plan approvals required after submitting. So, if it could be all addressed in one, I think that might make the most sense. I mean, so am I understanding that the two open, not two open, I mean, it's a closed item, I guess, on the four corners. So we need to address the cellar versus basement according to the board, or the turn would need to appeal your determination on that. And then, it sounds like the board is still, looking to make a final opinion on the site plan approval requirement.
And the other open issue is, or issue that you haven't really wrestled to the ground yet, is which grades are you starting with for your height calculation? I could address that in my memo also, although I'm not sure it's quite as much of a straight legal issue.
Okay.
But when they come back with the revised basement plan, you're going to still need to look at the height again based on what grades you think you're supposed to start from.
Well, I
Right.
think, yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to be clear, though, that the hearing is, the record is closed and that, there's no more letters and correspondence that can be submitted on this, correct?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I want to be clear on that. Okay.
Yep,
Other than
no,
Art-
absolutely. Other than Art,
from Art, yeah.
Art's providing us his legal opinion, so we'll take that in helping us reach our decisions. So I guess we're going to move to continue this
So he needs 2 weeks.
June
So-
3rd.
To continue.
Yeah.
I
Is that a
can't-
regular meeting June 3rd or no? Would that be another regular meeting or that would be another special meeting?
No, it'll be another special meeting. The 20th is our regular meeting. You'd get a week off.
Okay.
So would the 3rd work for you, Art?
Yeah, what day of the week is that?
It's the Thursday. It's the-
Thursday.
Still a Thursday?
Yep.
I will make it work.
Attorney Vaughn, Attorney Roloffs, does that work for you? For you to sit and listen to us
It
babble?
actually doesn't work for me, but since I'm not going to be involved in the conversation, it's probably fine. I don't want to be the cause of delaying it. The following week would be a lot better, but
I cannot do the following week, so it would be 5 weeks out. I got board meetings starting the first week in June, so.
if I can get cell service up in Acadia, then maybe I can cover it. But I plan to be out of town that day, but I don't think I need to be here for this.
Janine, does the 3rd work? I just committed to the 3rd without actually talking to the person who really can tell me whether or not the 3rd will work.
The 3rd should work. We're going to need an agreement to continue.
Yep,
Yep.
It is, the 29th is the 100th day.
okay,
The 29th of,
May.
Hey,
Of May is the 100th day.
Yeah, and if you need that from us, that's fine. I can work with you, Janine, to get you that.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
all right. Okay,
I will make a motion. I'm going to make my motion before. Thank you, Mr. Roloff. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I make a motion. Need to get motion to continue petition 3935, that of 2 Abbey Road, Lot 1 to June 3rd at 7 p.m.
second, Dorothy Simboli, second.
All in favor? I need a voice vote, Rob.
Robert Tedesco in favor.
Dorothy Simboli, aye.
Mark Waterbury, aye. All right, motion to adjourn.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Second,
you.
Dorothy
All in
Simboli,
favor?
second.
Aye.
Thank you.
Dorothy Simboli, aye.
See you all next week.
Robert Tedesco, aye.
Mark Waterbury, aye.
Good night, board members. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
You.